close in hand with the FSB. And if those guys didn't see this coming, like they didn't see the drones coming, even if it was a symbolic strike on the Kremlin, it shows you a massive hole in Russia's
Piotr,
just general defense
can I ask you a
intelligence.
question? Just something is not clicking. The Putin and Wagner, they've both crossed the red line. They've all, you know, Putin called this fighting heroically for the fate of the people, called it a betrayal, a mortal threat. Split in Russia is going to
That's
repeat
exactly what
itself.
happened, Mario.
And then we
I
saw
mean,
Prigozhin. I'll go to you right after Ian,
sure.
after Piotr. But we saw them Prigozhin just mention Putin and no, just move militarily to Moscow. I'm glad to see what was happening, but I just don't understand what's going to happen next. Like, how would this look like? Would they go back to
I have
business
some
as
ideas.
usual? Yeah, of
I
course.
so I
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Piotr, Patrick, and then Ian. Go ahead, Piotr.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my 2 cents is that this was about. I think the Wagner Group, or at least Prigozhin, had been planning something of this level. Maybe not this scale and this rapidity, but clearly I think that there was a degree of desire to force Putin to actually do something instead of, they've been making threats. Increasingly, Prigozhin has been making these very strong statements, words, and then it was time for action. So I am speculating here. I want to make that clear for everybody, but that's based on, previous examples that we've seen in the past few weeks and months. What have we seen? A huge amount of losses on both sides, but including Wagner at Bakhmut. It took them over 9 months to try and secure a town which was never strategically important for the Russians or the Ukrainians. And so clearly Prigozhin is feeling resentful and frustrated by that. And he was like, right, okay, I'm going to show how incompetent and how capable we as a Wagner force can quickly take some of the most well-defended in
Piotr,
theory.
the question, I'll repeat the
Yeah,
question again. But
sorry.
what could happen next? That's okay. But what could happen next? Like,
Well,
how?
mate, I think. Well, I think what's going to happen next is Putin is going to. I don't think there's going to be a change in leadership. I think there's going to be a removal of certain actors in the defense ministry. I think that those people that came out very candidly and expressed their support for Putin will suddenly disappear. And I think that this is, but it's difficult to tell because we're not in the mind of Putin. What I will say, bottom line, and I'll pass over to you, is that this is a new Russia in the sense of Putin is not, he hasn't got both hands on the steering wheel anymore. There is someone else in the cockpit who is, implicitly, forcing him, right? His position is severely weakened if it
I
wasn't
would
already from the war.
completely disagree with your assessment of that. I think
Good
Putin
to
is
know,
playing
Ian.
chess. Now, keep in mind, when all this was happening, what happened in Ukraine, right? The counteroffensive restarted, right? He restarted counteroffensive, pushed back a lot of positions. And at the end of the day, these Wagnerites, they're Russians, right? They don't want to see all of their efforts in Ukraine be diminished by this action, right? And nobody wants to see that. That's not the goal. The goal is to strengthen Russia, and Prigozhin himself has been extremely clear that the SMO would continue even after all of this happens, right? What I'm going to speculate now, I'm not in the mind of Putin, but I'm thinking like he plays chess, and right now he's going to consolidate his power. He's going to recognize all the failures of the Russian military and consolidate that under a more effective strategy. Like this is, if anything, it works out in favor of Putin.
But to Piotr's point, just to Piotr's point, and I'll be very fast. Just to Piotr's point, he's just talking about the reshuffling of power. How before it was Putin and Putin alone who made all the decisions. Now the person who's going to help guide Russia's military decisions is going to be Wagner Group and Evgeny Prigozhin. This is an entirely new framework of power for the state of Russia, and all of Putin's power emanates from his ability to control things and decide things. Putin in his pomp. This does not happen for Putin in his pomp. Putin in his pomp. First of all, no one has the balls to challenge him or stick their finger in his eye and challenge him. But Putin's pump crushes this revolt, takes power, and looks like our hero in Russia. Now that is not the case. He gave a speech which was pretty tepid, and now there's nothing but question marks in Russia. This is not something that would have happened just a few years ago.
So we do have just a battalion, Wagner battalion, that's going to hopefully join the space if they can. So I'm just sending him an invite now. In the meantime, I do want to read something that just came out. So I am getting reports that Wagner's troops are going back away from Moscow. So we're getting back to their military bases. But I just don't understand what is going to happen to. So everyone was saying it. I think everyone agreed. Prigozhin is we don't know if he's even going to survive this. If he's going to end up being jailed, there's no way he's going to continue operating as usual. But if this is the case, he's going back. He's no longer advancing towards Moscow. So either there's a deal to ensure his safety, or he's going to maintain a base in the south and maintain forces as form of protection. I just don't know how it's going to look for Prigozhin and what options Putin has. I'm sure things are being discussed in the background. Von?
Yeah, so I expect to see Shoigu and Gerasimov move the rest shuffled around eventually. I also expect to see anyone who sided with the coup to be purged, like Erdogan did, eventually, not right away. As for Prigozhin, I mean, amnesty was offered to everyone who put down their arms, and he did, so that applies to him too, technically. I think it was there was a lot of saber rattling and a lot of brinksmanship, but that amnesty and Lukashenko stepping in were a means for everyone to save face and go home without killing anyone. So happy ending, I guess, for the time being.
Patrick, I want to go to you, and again, my question is, I'm hoping to get some sort of answers of how that could look like, because the reason I just was surprised to see a resolution is I just didn't know, because when you cross a red line, it's just kind of the point of no return. I think we all kind of agreed that a few hours ago. That it was just difficult to see, to see either side take a step back, and someone has to emerge as the winner, either through conflict or the military chess happening behind the scenes. But it just seems that they've both agreed to kind of just end this peacefully. So what I want to try to understand is, how could they end it peacefully?
Well, the answer is they can't. And there's an old saying, if you take a shot at the king, you better not miss. Whatever Prigozhin thought he was doing, this looks like a shot at the king. And if he leaves Putin alive and in power, he's a dead man. Putin will consolidate, he will rebuild, he won't make this mistake again. And eventually he will purge Prigozhin and Wagner and anybody else who was even slightly hesitant to back the regime, because he has to. And if Prigozhin really thinks that this is going to go back to the way it was, he's a fool.
Well, hasn't been a fool so far. Every decision of his has been very calculated.
Well, they always are until they aren't.
I mean, this is the issue, really. He has. I mean, I agree with sorry, I couldn't. Whoever said that, because you essentially have a situation where one of them has to go. You can't have a scenario where they're both going to coexist now. And so the president of Belarus getting involved gives them an out, gives them both an opportunity not to look bad. And if somehow, which I have doubts about, that if he's able to give the leadership of the Wagner group to somebody else, then that would be a win for Putin. But I just doubt it, because he's he's so involved in being in charge of a Wagner group, and the Russian military have been relying on the Wagner group. For example, in Bakhmut, this is, despite whatever happens, this is still a huge loss for Putin, in my opinion.
I wonder what you're thinking if you're Xi Jinping now and you're sitting in Beijing. I mean, you rely on Russia, sort of existentially for commodities, and you're seeing, basically a private military group charge up to essentially uncontested up to Moscow with tanks, and now there's this power play. You're not really sure how it's going to shake out. I'm sure you're talking to people on the ground, but Russia is the most important, most strategic partner for China. You're seeing the United States trying to build this strategic NATO alliance with India to contain you, and you're just sitting here like, oh, this does not look good for us. I wonder what's happening in Beijing and what they're thinking about.
Do you want to watch it?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent question, because Mickey, like anyone knows, in these Ukraine-Russia discussions, I've always been pushing that I've not been in support of Ukraine as much as everybody else is. But even in this one, when I'm seeing what's happening, it just, again, makes Russia look weak. It makes, for example, NATO look a lot stronger. It makes it, and I know this is not about NATO, but you just have to look at it from a holistic perspective. I mean, anyone who's negotiating with Russia, and Russia was making even deals in what you're referring to, Mickey, they're having a discussion with China. We know that. I mean, this just puts everybody and gives everybody a situation where they'll have less confidence about going down that road now.
We'll come back 2 weeks from now and see what it looks like.
Ian, what do you think?
Yeah, okay. So I think come back 2 weeks from now and see what that looks like. Is the SMO going to ramp up? I mean, that's going to tell us everything we know about this current situation right now, which, arguably there's a fog of war situation going on right now. But 2 weeks from now, what does this look like? What does Russia look like? What does Ukraine look like in 2 weeks? Are they going to ramp up are they going to escalate the SMO? Because I predict that's what's going to happen.
They're going to have to, aren't they, Ian? They're going to have to significantly escalate to
Yes.
try and make people forget this, because this is a
And it's also a
disaster, no matter how it
consolidation
looks
of
like.
power, right? I mean, like I mentioned before, like Putin's playing chess here, and I think China is also playing chess. They're going to play the long game. They're not going to make any knee-jerk reactions or make any comments on the situation until it blows over, right? That's a smart move is just to keep quiet and monitor the
I just
situation.
want to read this, and again, this is from OSINT Defender, so I'm just going to read it because I've seen also a lot of accounts claim this, and this is from Russian state media, although I don't have the exact source, so I'm just going to read it directly. According to Russian state media, major changes to the leadership of the Russian Ministry of Defense, including changes to the current defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, and the Army Chief of General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, have reportedly been agreed upon in order to stop the march of Wagner PMC Group towards the capital of Moscow. These negotiations have also reportedly included the assured security of the Wagner Group. So if this is true, then this is what we were talking about earlier about Prigozhin, through the threat of force and violence, managed to get Shoigu and Gerasimov removed, if these reports come out true, indicating that for all intents and purposes, unless I think this is where I think Putin now has to plan his plan B, how does he regain control? I think, Patrick, you said it. Because right now, the guy who controls the guns and has the military force in Russia that can actually affect change, as demonstrated by what's going on, appears to be Prigozhin. So Putin definitely has to come up with a plan to tame it. But we got to see if these reports come true and Shoigu and Gerasimov are removed from the Russian Ministry of Defense.
So if they are removed, I think it shows, if anything, that Putin has always been in control. This thing was theater, right? I mean, we speculated early on that this was theater.
How he could have fired them in a heartbeat and nobody would have questioned him as much.
Are you sure
Wagner
about that? I
basically
mean,
launched
these
the
guys are
coup.
protected.
No,
They have a
no,
lot of political
Ian, you're right.
support in the Kremlin, right?
Okay.
Shoigu and
So Wagner
Gerasimov have a
launching
lot
the
of protections
coup.
in the Kremlin. And this, Prigozhin's always been calling it, right? He didn't call it a coup at first, right? The coup label was given to him by the Russian media and by the international media. But for him, and he has returned to this rhetoric about how it's a march of justice. It's proven its point. He proved his point, right? That the heads of the MOD need to be replaced. That needs to be some systemic change there that is going to benefit the Russians on the front lines. I mean, what was their meeting 3 days ago, 4 days ago, maybe 5 days ago by now? Because we're talking about this a day after this has all happened. What was that meeting between Putin and Prigozhin about? We don't know, right? We can only speculate on it. But I think Putin has always been playing chess here. And I might sound like maybe I'm being a bit of a fanboy or maybe wishful thinking here, but I mean, when was the last time Putin's made a mistake like this that saw
Ian,
something like this happen ever?
the meetings between a leader and the person who's launching a coup against that leader in history has happened. We've seen it in Mali. We've seen it in the across. That's not an indication that Sudan recently. Hamedi and Rouhani met consistently all the time, and Rouhani, Hamedi failed at the coup, and now they're in civil war. If
Putin's
for
not
Putin to
those
say
guys.
that, if
Hold
you're
on, Ian,
telling
hold
me
on.
then Shoigu and Gerasimov, if you're actually advocating that Shoigu and Gerasimov, with all reporting indicates, were lapdogs for Putin, that is clearly what it is, had enough power to be in control of the Kremlin, and that Putin could not have just automatically fired them, then you're just proving our point that Putin is not the most powerful man. So
And
either
now
he
perhaps
couldn't
he
fire
is.
Shoigu and Gerasimov,
And now perhaps he is.
he couldn't fire after declaring war on Prigozhin
The
and Prigozhin
consolidation of
having the
power looks
guns.
like this, right? And what we're going to see now is a purge, right? A general purge of the MOD, as well as all of the staff units that sided with Wagner. They're gone. They've
And
proven that
takes
they're
over
disloyal.
that. Is it Prigozhin going to take over?
Also,
Because if
also,
that's the
can I
case,
ask you a quick
Prigozhin has the weapons.
Also, a quick question, because
Oh,
I did miss a bit. What in terms of from the I know we're concentrating on this coup, but just in terms of what impact has this had? Because I heard Mario saying that there has been this loss in land. There's been movement from Ukraine. So in terms of from that perspective, how much have an impact has it had on the Ukraine?
I mean, I think there's some footage that's coming out, and I think there's going to have to be confirmed. But I don't want people to
Lost
expect.
ground. Also, has Russia lost ground due to this coup,
There is
or has that
reporting
had
of it.
zero to minimal impact?
I think there has been reporting of it. There's been reporting that Russia has lost ground. There has been reports that Ukraine has crossed the Dnieper River. But obviously, the whole entire focus right now has been on the current situation domestically in Russia, not on on Ukraine. And we have to get, although those videos might be a little bit delayed, and then it takes time to actually geoconfirm exactly what's happening. And then again, from Ukrainian sources, we have said there has been reports of Russian forces have been pulling out in certain sectors along the front line. Now, I don't believe is determinative of like now Ukraine has the upper hand, they're going to win automatically. But clearly, what Prigozhin did in Russia right now clearly had a major disruptive effort on Russia's defense, one way or another. The question is, how quickly can they recuperate if this is done? Because I think the excellent point was brought up. We need to see if Prigozhin actually follows his words and actually leaves Rostonov Dost.
So
That
the
is an
other
important
side of the
aspect.
argument of that also is that if there hasn't been, and this just goes to what Ian was saying, I just want to balance out the discussion, that if there has only been a minimal amount of movement from Ukraine, it hasn't in the battlefield, there hasn't been significant impact. He gets to consolidate power, and therefore Russia in the long term is a lot
How
more
does he
stronger.
consolidate? How does he consolidate power? And Prigozhin has the amount of power he has.
Ian's argument is that basically you've got people like Prigozhin, who was basically causing discontent in the administration. You saw him calling out the MOD a number of times. Putin might have used this and also found people
This,
who
I think
basically,
this is
who basically
silly.
didn't trust him.
I think this theory would have made sense about
No, I'm
16
not. This is not my position.
Yeah,
I'm
but I
just
think
giving
it's just
the
not. I wouldn't want to. Yeah, but I just don't want to. I want to push
Well,
that,
like I said, you got to see
theory.
how it plays out in
Yeah,
a couple of weeks. Right?
Yeah, let's see.
mean,
But
if
I
the
don't want to
arsenal
push.
continues
Hold
and
on.
it escalates,
Hold on. I
then
just.
it's going to be a big deal.
I'm not sure if you can hear me speak, but I was saying is that I think we've explained that theory pretty well. I think we're past it. And I just
You
want to.
really think
What
so?
I want to focus. Again, I don't know.
We're not past it. Just to consider how we passed it. If he starts basically
But Mario,
taking
I
out
think
some
the
of his
important
commanders,
aspect.
how we passed it? No, we're not
Hold
past
on,
it.
Suleiman.
There's something
This
there
is
you
the
might say it's
constant.
less credible. Also, let me finish my point. You might make the argument that it's less credible, but you can't make the argument that we're past it. That's like the.
But Mario, if I may, just and then we'll go.
Thank you,
I
Suleiman.
think, but again, this is the problem when we're having these debates. Remember when we first started this debate? What was the constant argument for those who are saying who are in favor of Putin? This was a psyops operation by the Russians to something Ukraine, something. Right? That was and then ever since then the goalpost continues to shift. This is what clearly happens. Wagner
No,
was
but
able to
also
take
that
advantage.
happens, and that happens on both sides, bro. Like even now, when
Okay, but
it
Guys,
happens on all sides. Even now, I'm seeing like you're right. That did happen. People make whoever's pro Russia or pro Putin was making them excuses. Similarly, now when the deal's happening, people on the other side are having a panic as well. So this happens. Like it's not one side who does this, and that's why from the balance perspective, like I agree with you that happens, but that's part of it. But anyway, let me go to Patrick. Patrick, what's your thoughts on what's going to happen next? So we know that there's these discussions. How long do we wait before we find out whether there's going to be fruition in these discussions, or will there be movement again? Could there be a retreat? Like, what do we think is going to be happening?
Is there actually one thing I want to ask Patrick? Is there a possibility any of this could be a bluff? Considering that I just don't understand how Prigozhin could still be in power after what we saw. So Patrick, maybe that's a question I'd like to know.
Well, I mean, I think I had this earlier. I think in the long run, Prigozhin gets purged. He has to. And I have to say, I don't agree with Ian on this. There is no way Putin did this just to get rid of Gerasimov and Shoigu, and for two reasons that stand out to me at least. Number one is the damage to his own legitimacy. It looks like he almost just lost his capital. Whatever Machiavellian games he was playing, that's going to be an impression on a lot of people.
There are 2 battalions?
Two,
I don't think so.
Ian,
a
please,
lot of his own troops refused to fight. And that's the other side of this. Yeah, they were conscripts. Yeah, they were rear area units, but they refused to oppose this. And that betrays a level of rot in the Russian army that is genuinely dangerous. I don't think he exposes both of those things just to get rid of 2 subordinate officers that he could have trumped up any number of charges on if he really felt he had to get rid of them.
No, I would say I would posit the opposite position here and suggest that this shows where Russia is weak and who needs to be purged, who needs to be gotten rid of, right? When you have commanders who are turning tail or siding with Wagner or standing down despite having orders not to do so, that shows they can't be trusted. Those guys are gone. Those guys are gone faster than Prigozhin is. And if anything, this proves what Putin needs to do to make sure that his army is 100% foolproof, right? Because yeah, it does expose a massive weakness in or series of weaknesses in the Russian military. All these things need to be dealt with, and we will see this being dealt with in the coming days and weeks.
Russia,
Make no
so
mistake.
important updates 1 minute ago. Russia retains control over tactical nuclear weapons that will be deployed in Belarus. This is in line with international obligations. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on the air of the ONT television channel. We were very concerned about the nuclear weapons of Belarus, and Russia claims they have these tactical nuclear weapons under control. Prigozhin's mercenaries leave Rostov-on-Don to the cries of leave Rostov. So they leave Rostov according to
Rostov.
this.
Okay.
And they're stating
who
Wagner.
this?
Guys, please, okay. I'll say it if you let me finish, please. Prigozhin. So Wagner in strength. That's according to SOTA. And then we've got TASS reporting in the work of the Telegram messenger in Russia. Failure continue according to the Down Detector portal. So this is just the latest update. Again, further de-escalation. People were saying earlier that we would not see a movement out of Rostov and just movement out of Wagner. So we see Wagner completely pulling out of everywhere, which is surprising to most. And very good news.
But, yeah.
Sorry, just as an update, Mario, what you read out about Wagner fighters in Rostov, I don't know whose mic's open, but it's echoing, leaving, that's true. But there's conflicting, and this is unverified at the moment, that Wagner troops are turning on Prigozhin and saying that this was a drive to Moscow and they will be going to Moscow regardless.
Who's saying that?
This is a Middle East Spectator. It's a Telegram channel who's been posting updates, so it's unverified at the moment.
I think there's just some pushback. I just don't think it's enough. If we look at the movement on the grounds, they are going back to their bases. But there's definitely going to be people that are not.
They're clearing out stuff.
Ian, please.
I'm sorry, I've interrupted you like a million times today, Mario.
Okay, thanks, bro. But there's movement back to the bases.
To give Mario credit, he's a lot of patience. He's going for nearly 23 hours.
30, so over 30. But yeah, so Von, what do you make of this? What do you make of Wagner forces going back to their bases?
I need to share something. So this is from a Rush Brief Telegram channel, another Russian Telegram channel. It says from FightTux News, quote, source, the criminal case against Prigozhin will be dropped and PSC Wagner fighters will receive legal immunity.
Who said that? Sorry, read that again also slowly, please.
Yes, is from Rush Brief, a Russian Telegram channel. And they say a source of theirs claims, quote, the criminal case against Prigozhin will be dropped and the PMC Wagner fighters will receive legal immunity.
Who made that statement?
It's a Russian Telegram channel called the Rush Brief.
And how
again, that shows.
Just to quickly want to verify how legitimate is that Telegram group? Because I know you know them well, also.
I mean, it appears. I mean, again, as anything.
Moldova, Libera, Moldova. There's media reports as well that criminal cases have already been dropped from Prigozhin. So
that will be most likely as part of the negotiation. And another important aspect to take into consideration is remember some of what Prigozhin said, that no blood was dropped. So that's an important aspect, that even though this was a coup, they both sides ensured that there was never any kind of physical conflict. I know some helicopters
7 Russian helicopters were shot down.
No human died, but also no human.
What do we know? Human died, Suleiman. Helicopters, 7 helicopters.
Humans flown by drones, perhaps AI.
Suleiman, people did.
KA-52.
Guys.
So after the helicopters dropped, Mario, we had reports where he continued to say. So unless Prigozhin is lying,
he's probably of a.
Have you guys got actual report that someone's died though? No, that's a real question. I'm not trying to be sarcastic. Have we got an actual report that someone died?
I'm pretty certain he said his.
No. Even look, guys. Again, if we have 5-10 people died, it's really bad. But if you look at the number of deaths in the Ukraine war, this I would still say this is a coup generally has a lot more deaths. So no blood. I don't want to sit there pointing out about him lying, not lying, etc. At the end of the day, very little to no blood was spilled. I think this is what matters. But I think the impact this will have is I think positive. I hope it's going to be positive. And for me, what's positive is an end to the Ukraine war, finally. Now, how that, and hopefully I could be completely wrong, But hopefully that's what we'll see. This is for me positive. But yeah, I want to go to Mickey and Von. You guys have been waiting patiently. Go ahead, Mickey.
Vaughn's been waiting for like 30 minutes here.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Von, Mickey, go ahead.
So, what was your question, Mario? I'm sorry, I heard it, but then I got sidetracked with everyone getting
Prigozhin just got immunity as well as his forces. So how long is that immunity going to last for? We know what Putin does to anyone that questions his authority. What would you expect him to do? How long will that mutiny last? Is that a legitimate, not mutiny, immunity? And how long? Yeah, what can Prigozhin? What options that Prigozhin has?
Breaking news from TASS here: in Voronezh, the restrictions on movement of vehicles has been lifted.
Wow, everything is just moving so quickly. This is mental.
Yes.
It's finished. Yeah.
This is mental.
It's done. As I said earlier, Putin offered amnesty to anyone in Wagner who put down their arms. This negotiation is Prigozhin putting down his arms. Therefore, he's eligible for the amnesty. This will hold for the near term. I don't know midterm. I mean, he did commit treason, so like eventually he'll probably get purged. But like I said, I expect to see. And everybody's talking about African coups here and there, but the one that people I think we should really focus on is the Turkish. Is a Turkish coup, and how Erdogan jumped on opportunity to use it to his advantage to consolidate power. I expect Putin to do much the same. As Ian said, all the disloyals outed themselves as disloyal. Expect them to be purged. Anyone who was hesitant to immediately side with the government, I expect to see viewed with great suspicion going forward, to say the least. This is bad for Russians. This is probably really bad for Ukraine too, because this is potentially where we see this consolidation lead to basically a much more hardline approach, because Gerasimov and Shoigu were two of the major roadblocks of that. So it's going to be very interesting to see who replaces them at the helm. It's going to be very interesting if it's Surovikin, because General Armageddon didn't earn that name for no reason. So that's my take on this. Also, for what you said, all source, yes, people are moving the goalposts. People on all sides do that. But let's be honest, if you're not adapting your argument and your perspective to as you gain a new information, then you are not thinking analytically. And I don't understand what the point is if you're not being analytical to that degree.
No, look, I just remember. I'm just saying this, and I'm going to say it again.
By you, I don't mean you personally. I just want to be clear.
I know, but I think because I want to agree with you on something that I think is very important, and this is where we cannot just. This is something that Patrick has said, and I think we need to highlight importantly. If Prigozhin managed to get, and it looks like it's all coming to fruition. It looks like it's all getting to fruition. If Prigozhin, through his actions, which were clearly, as I think we all agree, was an armed insurrection / coup, armed rebellion, or whatever, new mutiny or whatever, managed to, 1, gain immunity for him and his force. 2, get Wagner now to be incorporated with legal protection under the Russian MOD. 3, managed to get Gerasimov and Shoigu fired. If you're Putin, you, as Patrick said, and I think everybody said here, importantly, he is forced to consolidate power because right now Prigozhin has the weapons. He has the power. He has demonstrated by his action that he is the most influential player right now in Russia. He achieved his overall objective by threatening to go into Moscow. Nobody's disputing that he was marching towards Moscow. He was going to Moscow. When he achieved his objective, he consolidated and pushed back. I'm sorry, but this idea that Putin somehow now thinks that he somehow consolidated power, I just can't see how anybody can look at Putin and say, you're clearly the most powerful man in Russia, when you have Prigozhin, who through military force managed to do that. And that's been my argument. This is a challenge to Putin's regime because Shoigu and Gerasimov were part of the Putin regime.
You're underestimating him.
But on the flip side, It's not that he has to take the opportunity. This is an opportunity to consolidate power. Take it. But on the other hand, it's weird to look. He didn't achieve this by military force. He moved the column up to Moscow and then accepted amnesty and negotiated. We got to take all the factors into account here. This isn't some I drove tanks into Moscow and shot people. This isn't. Yes, it's a challenge to his power, but not to the extent that people think. You got to look at these things a bit more balancedly, because he accepted the amnesty. It was negotiated, and an attempted coup that ended with single-digit bloodshed, because there's pedants who are going to call me on that, and negotiation, and that's a sign of weakness. You guys are insane.
No, but Vaughn, okay, first of all, this is the greatest loss of life for the Russian Air Force since the beginning of the invasion, number one. Number two, though, that I think is very important to highlight, that we need to admit. We are assuming right now that generals within the Ministry of Defense will willy-nilly accept this. Let's say, Ian, you're right, that Gerasimov and Shoigu have enormous political power that Putin cannot fire them on their own, and now they've just been released. Then what is the effect on the Russian military chain of command where a private military corporation can dictate who is in power within the Russian Ministry of Defense? This might be over in this time frame right now, but you have to analyze the second and third order effects. Ideally for Putin, everything just settles, the dust settles, everything goes away. But if I'm Sirvokin, if I'm a Russian general currently in Ukraine, and Prigozhin comes up to me and says, you will do this, you will execute this operation, does that Russian general has the balls basically to say, no, I'm not going to do that because of X, Y, and Z? This is a complete, this is the textbook example of degradation of mission command and control, and firing your Minister of Defense and chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff during an active war is, one, terrible in of itself, and two, the down effects across the chain of command will be felt. I think that, now, this is clearly, I'm speculating, but just to say this is done, let's shake our hands and everything is hunky-dory for Russia, after everything we just saw in the last 12 to 24 hours, we need to continue to analyze the effects of the Russian military going forward on this.
Also, can I ask you a question? So obviously I've been following this and you've been following it. So you said, I'm really glad this is the outcome at the moment. But you said Prigozhin wanted to show Putin that he has all the power. Mission accomplished. He's done that and now he's retreated. For what? So why would you make an enemy of somebody like Putin just to show him you have the power and then retreat and think it's all fine? What was the purpose of this? Surely this whole exercise over the last 24 hours was not just to show Putin from a distance. Because do you think Putin's not going to take measures now to do damage limitation, to protect and
I agree with you, Khaleesi, 100%.
So then what's the point? No, what I'm asking is, I'm not being confrontational, but I'm just brainstorming with you. What was the point of this? Surely it just wasn't to show the power. There must have been, I'm still trying to figure it out myself. What was the purpose of this? Why did you do it?
Because I think Prigozhin, so this is the question that we need to analyze also, right? And I want to push it on to other speakers. I don't want to hog the space. Is that now Prigozhin can now claim that he has been framing for months now about the incompetency of the Russian Ministry of Defense. He has made it his effort that his enemies are Shoigu and Gerasimov. Through his Telegram channels and posts, he has not been able to achieve those objectives. He just was not successful. So he used this force. Now, what I think there might be some backstory to this, right? And I think where this kind of ties into is that Shoigu, let's not forget, attempted to consolidate power under the Russian PMCs and force them to sign them as part of Russian Ministry of Defense. Right? This has been a push of the Russian Ministry of Defense consistently to have Wagner subordinate to the Russian Ministry of Defense. Prigozhin has been fighting vigorously against that and trying to maintain his independence as a mercenary group. He has now achieved that through these negotiations. He has now achieved that he is undisputably one of the most powerful figures in Russian military and political aspects in Russia today. He has demonstrated it with, as he claims, with not significant amount of bloodshed. Yes, the Russian Air Force has suffered an enormous amount of losses, but that can be. But now Prigozhin says, now I have legal protection for Wagner. But to your point, Khaleesi, Putin is not done. If Putin is willing to poison and kill dissidents across the world for defecting, he is
Yeah, I
clearly going to
agree.
have
I
to
agree
target
also.
Putin and Prigozhin.
This isn't,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with you. This isn't over. And what you just said there, maybe it was actually to enforce what his role in all of this is, and it's not subordinates. And maybe that's what it is. He's shown it, but I just think it was crazy.
Another thing
Crazy
you have to keep
crazy.
in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is that meeting that Prigozhin had with Putin. He obviously looked him in the eye and he says, "I am not afraid." This movement that he
Were
had
you
is
there,
nothing but a
Mickey?
challenge
Were
to
you
him.
there?
This. Listen, there's no way you have a meeting with a guy and then 3 days later you challenge him. You go and you take his fruit cup and you say, "I don't think you're going to do shit. I'm going to come to Moscow and I'm going to make you fire the people I don't like." And there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it. You know, to Vaughn's point, I understand the change of assessment, but let's look and document the change of assessment so far. In the beginning, it was like, this is not happening, it's a psyop. Then this is happening, but it's not a big deal. Then this is happening, but it's not a coup. It's just it's some kind of rebellion. Okay, it's a coup, but it's not a big deal. Now it's okay. It's a coup. It's a big deal, but actually it was Putin's design the entire time, and he's absolutely in charge.
I've been
Pretty
saying
soon,
that the
what's going to
whole
happen
time.
is
What are you
this is
talking
Joe
about?
Biden and Hillary Clinton's fault. I think I think all source is absolutely correct, and Piotr is absolutely correct. We are now starting to see the emergence of a multipolar Russia. And if you are China or if you are allied with Russia, you're starting to have question marks about who's actually in control. This is the first time it's ever happened. Nobody ever, we can all agree that Putin in his pomp, this does not happen. But everybody goes into decline. Every boxer goes into decline. Every leader goes into decline. This is like when you watch Putin's speech, it was sort of like a little bit wishy-washy in a sense, right? It wasn't as strong as a historical Putin piece. Putin in his pomp, if somebody marches an army from Rostov to Moscow, Putin in his pomp kills them all, emerges as a Russian hero, and basically gives them zero tolerance. Now he's giving them amnesty. Every military leader is going like, huh, interesting.
But Mickey,
If
that's
I just
assuming that
flex my
Prigozhin
ability.
doesn't fall out of a window. I mean, I'm just being
Well,
honest with you.
let me say, Danish, I understand that, but like Prigozhin has made the calculation that he's not going to. I agree with you. There's nobody who's challenged Putin politically who is alive today. Nobody. So if Evgeny Prigozhin
It's funny you should say that.
if he
I'm just going to interrupt
survives,
you one
then that
second.
is
Yeah, I have
every
an
moment that
update.
he is alive is a.
Just sorry, Mickey, I just muted you. Just Khaleesi's got an update, then I'll go straight
Yeah,
back to you.
and it
Go ahead.
kind of adds to Mickey's point. Statements coming out, anti-terrorism committee, cases of provocative messages with calls to participate in protests are recorded. These actions are criminal. Measures will be taken. And that's from the National Anti-Terrorism Committee in
If you
Russia.
guys,
So it kind of goes
if you guys
point.
don't think that the Russian military or their intelligence agencies are monitoring all of social media, you're mistaken. All of these accounts, all of these Telegram accounts that were pro Wagner and calling for Putin to be decapitated, they're done. They're finished.
They know that they're being monitored, and a lot of people believe that the FSB was upset at the invasion of Ukraine from the very beginning, and a lot of people in Russia believe that the FSB backed Prigozhin in some way, shape, or form. They would not have had this march on Moscow if they did not feel he had backing. Prigozhin is not a fool. He knows what he is doing. So every day this guy is alive, is a spit
Prigozhin
in
is
the
a
face of
pawn of
Vladimir Putin, and
Putin.
he knows it.
Prigozhin is a pawn of Putin. He is fully financed by the Russian government. Wagner itself is fully financed by the Russian government. All their weapons and supplies are from the Russian government. Prigozhin is not a military commander. He's just the face of Wagner. How
What
come
does the
when
M in
Putin's
PMC stand
previous
for, Ian?
inflammatory statements,
Please
why
tell
wasn't
me.
he arrested? He's a useful tool, right? That's what Putin always uses him for. He's a cudgel. When Putin needs to do something that's blunt, he sends in Prigozhin, and he gets the job done. Today, he got the job done.
This might
How
not
did
be
Guys,
over,
I've
though.
just let me just give you a quick update for the audience. I've just tweeted a summary of what we know so far, just summarizing all the breaking news that came in. Everything's been discussed. I've just kind of pinned it above. Let me pin it in the space as well. Let me know if I missed anything, guys. But let me read out what we know so far, just for anyone that just joined. It's really good news. I'm just really happy and at peace, on a personal level, at peace after seeing this. So I'll read out what I said. The official statement from Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group and the leader of this coup, says it all. I don't think anyone expected this. That's obviously my personal opinion. Quote, they were going to dismantle Wagner. We came out on 23rd of June to the March of Justice. In a day, we walked to nearly 200 kilometers away from Moscow. In this time, we did not spill a single drop of blood of our fighters. By the way, Sully, he says of our fighters, so he's saying his fighters haven't died, which is hard to believe because we've seen his convoy get hit, but again, it doesn't really matter. Now the movement has come when blood may spill. That's why, understanding the responsibility for spilling Russian blood on one of the sides, we are turning back our convoys and going back to field camps according to the plan. The president of Belarus, Lukashenko, has been, and someone just removed it. Let me read it here. Accepted. The president Lukashenko has been in talks with Prigozhin all day. Prigozhin accepted the terms of Lukashenko's agreement and agreed to help the movement of armed individuals affiliated with the Wagner Group in Russia and take additional measures to de-escalate tensions. The agreement also guarantees security for fighters of PMC Wagner. It seems that the attempted coup has come to an end, and Prigozhin, along with his men, will return to their bases. Reports of Wagner forces not only leaving Moscow, but also leaving Rostov. Media reports that criminal cases have already been dropped from Prigozhin, and that Prigozhin and his forces will receive full immunity. Restrictions on movement of vehicles have been lifted from the Voronezh region, which saw clashes during the coup. My thoughts. I did not expect this that would end peacefully with a deal, as it seems both sides seemed at the point of no return. I have no idea how Prigozhin and Putin can both operate in Russia with what just transpired. That's why I've just been asking this whole time the panel. And I also have no idea what will happen with the war in Ukraine, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see a space instead of peace deal reached. Today was another example of citizen journalism replacing mainstream media with unbiased and uncensored live breaking news. So my question would be just to the panel, and let's go to Mark Driddle. Good to have you, Mark. Now, I think you're on the ground. You've got communication with Wagner forces, and Piotr is up as well. But what could that look like? And something we all agreed on, and everyone was in agreement that this was all very well planned. We saw the Russian military say this. Everyone was agreeing that this was very well planned. So, was it planned to eventually reach a peace deal, or was it planned to go all the way to a successful coup and take the leadership? Because they were pretty close, or at least seemed pretty close, Mark, to Riddle. But they didn't go all the way. Go ahead, Mark. You got to unmute Mark Driddle. If not, we'll go to Piotr. Mark Driddle. Piotr, you there?
I have a thought, actually, if they're not here.
I mean, just one point. I don't know if you've announced this, but it says again, this is from Lukashenko's press service, and it says the president of Belarus informed Putin about the results of the negotiations with the leadership of Wagner PMC. The president of Russia supported and thanked his Belarusian counterpart for the work done. So again, he's taking credit for, and probably may have had a significant impact in ensuring that basically things don't escalate. So you're going to go to Sneak? Oh, he's dropped as well. Piotr. Oh, he's dropped.
It's glitching. I think for the crazy.
Did you have it? See. I think Khaleesi's got an update, and if not, then I'll go to somebody else. Go on, Khaleesi. What did you say?
Yeah, just very quick. So one of the ones is the one that you've just given, and not to dampen the spirits of kind of relief here. But there is another one. Rybar is reporting, and I'll read it. It's too early to rejoice. According to intelligence data, the next phase of the counteroffensive of the armed forces of Ukraine is expected to begin tonight. The main blows will be directed not only to Bakhmut, and it's listed these two other regions which I can't pronounce. Activation is expected along the entire front line. So that was the update, and that's Rybar reporting that.
Oh, I've got more news. I just found out. I thought I was going to sleep for a long time. I've got a flight in not long. I have a long flight to LA to film a show. So breaking news. I will not sleep. Let me Ian, please.
Go to me.
Ian,
enjoy your
guys. Ian, we'll go to you, but there's a lot of hands up, man. I promise you've got the record for the most talking.
Like everybody
please.
was dropping, and I guess I dropped too.
Yes, exactly. Yep. Ian, please.
Yeah. But this is.
Thank you, Ian. I appreciate the permission. Piotr, again, the same question is as I've asked earlier. It's a more broad question, actually. What can happen next? And if this was all planned, was the peace deal planned as well? Or was it actually not planned and they still succeeded the way they did? It just questions a lot of things.
Yeah, I get you. And I would appreciate it if Ian can hold the mic for just a second, because he's quite hot, and I think it
please, on a serious note, let's just keep it a nice discussion.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, I'll talk to the subject matter. So, for me, I'm not going to pretend that I was like, yes, this was all part of some conspired plan. But when you begin to look what's the hindsight is marvelous, isn't it? Right? We can all sit here now comfortably in our couches and say, yes, that was all part of a very clearly well executed plan, and maybe even the peace deal was. I'm not sure. I mean, clearly there was a desire to do something, I think, to make Putin sit up and pay attention even more than statements from Prigozhin. But maybe the Wagner Group didn't expect it to go this well. To what we were talking about the last time I was on stage with Ian when we were chatting about it, even if it isn't a massive threat to Putin in real time, it is a massive impact to his, at least from an optical point of view. Geopolitically speaking, international relations speaking, this is going to have harmed people's belief, I think, in Putin a little bit, even
A
if it
little
hasn't
bit, Piotr,
undermined it
let's be honest,
actually.
it's a lot. And before, don't no one jump in.
I think it is, but I'm trying to be fair to both sides. I don't want to get into a back and forth, right? So I'm trying to be, balanced here. In terms of next phases, I'm going to be looking at statements from foreign governments. I'm going to be looking at statements from the Kremlin themselves. I'm going to be looking at what Telegram and the people of Russia are saying about this. And I'm also going to obviously be looking at what's happening in Ukraine. On the ground for the Ukrainians specifically, again, whether or not you are on the Ukrainian side or the Russian side, this has played into the Ukrainians' hands marvelously. You had 400,000 troops or so of Russian forces on the eastern banks of oblasts in Ukraine, and now suddenly a whole bunch of them have had to be diverted or distracted, and suddenly we've got unconfirmed reports of Ukrainians pushing through all the way to sort of, in some cases, I think there was that suggested convoy that was Ukrainian in Russian territory, right? I think that was pretty debunked quickly, but it goes to show just how quickly this situation can change. And I really do think, for me at least, as someone who has strongly pushed back against the likes of Kim and others, in that Russia and China are the new face of the international system. I think this illustrates that whilst the US and allies definitely have their issues, so do more centralized states like Russia and China, and that no country is not at risk from power struggles, basically. So
Martin,
at
and
one
I just
point, I
I'll
would
read.
just
I just want to read this news that I think is important that was shared in the
go
chat, and I
ahead.
think it provides context and it provides explanation of why Lukashenko was part of the negotiation. So what I will say is, I'm just going to read it directly. Prigozhin and the PMC Wagner, as part of the agreement, goes to Belarus to guard the border with Ukraine and Poland. This is the essence of Lukashenko's guarantees. It was he who guaranteed Putin that he would look after him. So that's the key thing. So it looks like
Say that again. Sorry, sir. Can you say
Lukashenko
that also?
managed to
Can you say that
convince Putin.
also?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
So
Can you
I'll
read
it
that again?
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. Also, just do it a bit slowly.
Yeah. So Prigozhin and the PMC Wagner will go to Belarus to guard the border with Ukraine and Poland. This is the essence of Lukashenko's guarantee. It was he who guaranteed Putin that he would look after him, which is Prigozhin. So it looks like that. So that ties into why Lukashenko. So Wagner now will pull his forces to Belarus to guard the border of Poland and Ukraine, and it also probably serves as a guarantee for Lukashenko for his own stability of his own regime. And so Wagner might not be a prevalent military force anymore in Ukraine, which is also a very interesting development. But it looks like Wagner might not be an active force in Russia if this part of the agreement actually happens.
Let me go to.
Before I go to anyone, just quickly, I've just brought down all source. If you could bring it back up, Suleiman. I just want to tell everyone what we've just gone through. It's just fascinating. Over the last 24 hours, waking up in a 24, 30 hours, whatever, waking up a normal day, suddenly getting reports of a possible coup. That coup suddenly escalates with the Wagner chief who's leading the coup taking over. I'm not going to say taking over territory, but essentially moving to the southern district and seemingly having control of about a quarter or a fifth of the Russian military, including the headquarters for the Russian military in Ukraine, and then moving towards Moscow extremely quickly and getting to Moscow Oblast, the state of Moscow, with reports of potentially Putin fleeing, very limited resistance, and a lot of us, almost everybody, saying that this looks actually everybody on stage said this looks really bad for Putin. And then when everyone's expecting the worst and fearing the worst and talking about what's going to happen next and talking about the worst case scenarios, and looking at a scenario where the point of no return has been reached and was reached a really long time ago, somehow last minute a peace deal is apparently reached, and then we get mixed messages. Is there a peace deal? Is there not a peace deal? Just imagine that roller coaster we've been on, and in that whole time, while this is all happening, everything's happening on Twitter. Everything's happening live. Elon Musk tweeted, Bill Ackman, just everybody supporting what we're doing here with citizen journalism, reporting everything live, reporting from the ground, reporting all sides of the story, verifying things live in the space. Before, I would watch all this mainstream media and their live feeds. They'd be 10, 20, 30, 40, 60, 65, 70 minutes late reporting the same stuff we reported. And then we get this peace deal that was reached. And then some reports of Wagner troops halting. We're trying to understand, is that true, is not true? And funny enough, like most things we got turned out to be true, which is crazy. And then they start going back to away from Moscow. Like, all right, we're going to go back to the southern district, and they're going to base themselves there, but we're just not sure how it's going to go. I thought it could be a bluff, and they're heading to Rostov, which is, again, the southern district, where they took over the headquarters, and that's going to be their base. But then we saw them get out of Rostov and go back to their military bases and get immunity. And now we're hearing they're going back to Belarus. All this over 24 hours. My conclusion, first, citizen journalism kicks ass, number one. Number two, the world we live in is just so fragile. When you see one of the biggest militaries in the world go through what it's just gone through, however you want to interpret it, remember, we don't know most things. We were not on the calls with Lukashenko or with Putin or with Zelensky. If you were, let me know, but I'm sure none of you were. So a lot we don't know. But all we know is that what's happened was unexpected, was confusing, and no one really knew. A lot of people say, I knew this, I knew that. Almost everybody got at least one thing wrong because we did not know. And this was unprecedented. But it's come to a peaceful conclusion. We'll see what happens next. But I just want to point out the incredible journey we've all been on together here on Twitter Spaces, and it's an incredible feeling, and I haven't gone through something like this since the FTX collapse, if some of you remember, and this is for me the biggest event I've ever gone through, or the most concerning one on a personal level and on a business level since the Ukraine war. So I just want to applaud the speakers, the panelists, everyone that's come and gone, and of course the co-hosts, Allsource and Suleiman and Khaleesi. I do want to go back to the discussion, though. Seeing where we are now, Danish, would love to get your
Mario,
thoughts.
Mario,
go ahead, Suleiman.
Mario, just
Go ahead, sir.
quick note. First of all,
Sorry.
amazing job, because even before that, we had the interview with Imran Khan, which was Twitter. So
Oh man, add to the story. I forgot. We interviewed the former Prime Minister of Pakistan who could be arrested. We were worried he's going to be arrested just before the interview. And the internet was slowed down in Pakistan while we did the interview. And the story there is incredible. It's an incredible interview. You should listen to it. The former Prime Minister of Pakistan that was ousted a few months ago was being interviewed here on Twitter Spaces while the coup was ongoing. And me and you were debating, should we end the interview as one of the most powerful and important people in the world to cover the coup, which is one of the biggest events in the world, or cover it? So we covered it and then asked Prime Minister Khan about his thoughts, because he met Putin the day after the invasion.
Yeah, and it's been surreal. Just another report from Ocean Defender, and he claims it's from the Russian state media. He says that there's going to be major changes to the leadership of Russian Ministry of Defense, including to the current defense minister Shoigu and the army chief Gerasimov, and have reportedly been agreed upon in order to stop the march of the Wagner PMC group towards the capital of Moscow. These negotiations have also reportedly included the assured security of Wagner Group. So again, I mean, if that's again part of the deal, that is huge. Like, I mean, Ian, I have to.
There's another before you go, Ian. There's another piece of news as well, Sully.
It just doesn't look good for
the
Putin.
Akhmat unit has withdrawn completely from Belgorod, so that's a Chechen army, as according to a brief source. And also Viktor Alkansis, who's a Russian political and former Soviet Air Force colonel of Latvian descent. He's a chairman of the Russian Center of Free Technologies.
Is he based in the U.S.? He's based in the U.S., right?
Yeah, he's probably anti-Russia based on what he said. Let me just try and check now.
He's coping right now. He's saying that I'm reading his quote here. I have to admit with bitterness that the Russian Federation has come one step closer to its final and irreversible death. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of cope there. Suleiman, what was your question?
Well, my question is you've got, like, first of all, if Prigozhin lives, that's gonna really make Putin look weak. If he does nothing to the guy who did all this, that's not great, right? It's gonna give other people impetus to do the same later. The second question is, if part of the deal is that Prigozhin gets what he wants and he has to basically drop Garizmov and Shoigu, again, you have Prigozhin being basically, Putin having to basically bend the knee. I mean, overall, if all these things happen and there's no consequences, this makes Putin look really bad.
There's plenty of
Well, yeah, but
consequences.
Suleiman, that's exactly what I said. Putin doesn't have both hands on the steering wheel. It's
Taylor,
a
is your name Ian
co-pilot.
Mouse Chong?
Sorry. Yeah, possibly, but it's just I don't think we can just ignore the fact that this is a new chapter in
I need to
Russia's modern
speak.
day
I want to
existence, right?
speak. I've been waiting quite patiently and not interrupting people.
Ian, just before you do, I have an update.
Sure.
Just going to the point that All Sorts made earlier and what Suleiman said. CNN is citing sources saying US and Western intelligence have learned that Prigozhin has been amassing weapons and ammunition near Russia. If reports are true that Prigozhin and Wagner will receive guarantees at the level of the Duma, then this means that a private parallel army will be legalized in Russia, which will not obey the central government, and Prigozhin himself will emerge victorious and stronger than he was before. And I think that's the point that All Sorts and Suleiman just made.
Oh, no. I mean, I don't think that. Like, I think that's just again the Western media trying to.
So I have a news from RA
Because I don't agree to that level, because that's just they're trying to make it look like there's two armies were equal. It's to cause another civil war. That's why they're doing it, the mainstream media. But my point is this: that no matter how, so it's a more separate point. That is, no matter how this comes across, this makes Putin look weak unless he doesn't do something to Prigozhin. So this makes him look extremely weak.
Okay, so I have an update from RA University before I answer your question.
I'm going to push it on to Xerxes right now because I know he's been waiting for this.
Can I report the fucking news?
Yeah, just let Ian is fine.
Good
Ian,
Lord, like
you know what? I got to drop.
I'm having
the
before I have a
sorry,
chance
guys,
to speak, and I'm trying to break some news here.
No, Ian, go ahead.
So PMC Wagner, apparently, this is RIA Novosti, that's the Russian state media, plans to return to its field camp in the LPR, that's the Luhansk People's Republic, according to Wagnerites who are currently present in Rostov, right? So they're exiting Rostov, and they said that they're going back to their field camp in LPR. That's RA Novosti. So that's the latest update on that. As for what I wanted to say, I mean, this whole thing has been a wag the dog situation, right? It's been months in the works. You don't get to do what he did without people knowing about it, right? So, and I want to read a really funny message from Patrick Henningsen, right? I think this is for the audience here, right? He says, we've teamed up with Samaritans to open a 24-hour helpline, a therapy and counseling line for any NAFO fellas currently in meltdown over the coup that wasn't a coup. Anyone needing help getting through this tumultuous episode, just call 1-800-888-COPE. We're here to help you. So, yeah, you can go to Xerxes or whoever.
Yeah, go ahead, Xerxes.
Yeah, I had a quick question for Patrick. So just some of the stuff I was reading, funny enough, I was on reading through some of these IRGC Telegram channels saying, if Putin needs us, we're going to go over there. We'll prop him up just like we did it in Syria with Assad. I thought that was pretty funny. But I had a question about where we go here when it comes to Wagner. I mean, some people are saying kind of what's the future of the group. We're seeing them in Syria. We're seeing them all over Africa in certain areas. I don't want to go through the list of places, but I'm curious, Patrick, I wanted to get your opinion on kind of what you see next as their future in some of these areas, because depending on what some people think, I don't think they're going to be absorbed into. I think that what someone said earlier, I agree with kind of where they're going to move forward. I don't think they're just going to be absorbed into the Russian military. But I'm curious on what the future of that group is in these different areas, because I mean they are their removal in some of these areas, or them being taken out, it affects stability in a lot of different regions. So I'm curious on what you think about that, Patrick, or whoever wants to chime in on that.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. I think we probably see Wagner continue to operate, especially in the developing world. They've, for much worse, actually, been able to make some decent money there. As far as the Ukrainian front, if all sources are right, and that turns out to be true, that they are being rotated in to guard the Belarusian border, both against Ukraine and also Poland, that is going to remove a lot of reliable combat power from the active front against the Ukrainian army. And that in and of itself is dangerous, especially if they really are doing a command shakeup as some part of this deal with Prigozhin. So that may actually come back to bite them. We'll have to see. But as far as Wagner's overseas operations, again, if assuming Shoigu or assuming Prigozhin survives, yeah, I would expect those to continue at least for the foreseeable future.
And just to tag on to that, Zerhis, I mean, there were reports on and off that, sort of Wagner were going to be pulled out of Mali and that they were going to be lowering their activities in Syria and Libya. But, that was never confirmed. And equally, how on earth would you operationally have, logistically speaking, gotten them from Africa to this part of Russia if it was genuinely a coup attempt by Wagner forces, right? I think what it also illustrates is just how competent the Wagner forces really are when they're not even at full capacity. So there's that to keep in mind. And I just also think that, broadly speaking, I don't know, personally, Ian, I don't agree with you. I've studied this for the best part of 6 years, and Suleiman, I don't agree with your interpretation that there isn't going to be a fundamental restructuring of the power structure of Russia, right? I don't agree that it's the Western media trying to distill a certain agenda. This whole issue is an internal Russian affair, which I don't think the Western media or Western entities, governments, have even had a remote ability to respond to. I don't think they're
I
trying to
have a
spin a
question for
certain.
you. What do you think of this, right? Since you do geopolitics, and some of us here not quite as familiar with this situation. What's your take on how the only two, well, I would say like the first two and perhaps the only two largest voices that came out in support of the Kremlin, like publicly, most people were saying that they were going to monitor the situation, see how it unfolds. The only two that actually publicly supported Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin were Erdogan and Lukashenko. Well, what's your take on that? Like, why would they do that? I mean, they seem pretty confident on this. I mean, like we saw a staged coup in 2016 when Erdogan did something similar, I would argue.
I'm familiar.
Yeah. So
yeah, I
how do you
think
read that?
I think Erdogan. I can't remember what the Turkish statement said. I don't think he explicitly said Putin. I think he said for the current
No, he
government.
said
He said
Putin.
Putin.
He did
Yeah.
say Putin. If you can.
Erdogan, and did say Putin. Iran
Okay,
did not.
so
Iran did
in
not.
in that case, then that's because Putin expressed his undisputed support for Erdogan in the election. As I said, Erdogan and Putin may have differences in terms of interests over, say, the Caucasus or the Middle East, but they are very similar, right? I
Could
look
it
at Russia and Turkey as two sides of the same
could it
coin,
be possible that they
because the
knew the
two countries
score?
are.
That Lukashenko, who's obviously a big player in all this
Yeah.
unfolding, and Turkey, right, and Erdogan. Do you think it's possible they knew the score? What was going on really in the Kremlin, in Putin's head? I mean,
Well, let's cast our minds back. As the day went on, who was the first person Putin spoke to? It was Lukashenko.
yeah.
What happened in Belarus quite quickly? We saw a development of activity there as well. So, what I would say very firmly is that I think Lukashenko has come out of this quite well. Actually, I used to think he was a bit of a diluted puppet, but
He looks
actually he's
strong.
shown to be a very valuable figure for Putin in his near abroad, in his counterbalancing against the West and so on. So, and Erdogan, I think it's shown you that if you have a very steadfast, strong cohort of autocratic leaders, strongmen, then you can survive quite well. But I just I think we should be careful in making strong claims that this isn't a major challenge to the existing power structure. Putin's going to have to make some
Oh,
changes. The
and
defense industry is going to have to
speaking
change.
of changes,
And
I mean, Putin, in this 24-hour period, he has passed a number of new laws and regulations that not only reshape the apparent makeup of the MOD, but also the general core, right? I mean, he's offering basically amnesty and recruitment for prisoners, right? That's one of the things that he's pushing in, and also there's new crackdowns on various, I wouldn't say freedoms, but like the way that things are handled on in the media and in civilian life itself. I mean, a lot of people, they showed their hand today, right? Putin forced them to play their hands. They came out swinging, thinking that, oh, Putin's finally going to be toppled, and now they're worse for wear. I mean, like I'm just hearing reports now that all those signs and those logos of Wagner that were removed from public spaces, because people are tearing them down. They're appearing back up again. Wagner symbols are appearing all over again.
100%. And what I'd add to that is the war. This thing has happened. A flash fire, if you like, a flash event has suddenly happened, and we're sort of thinking. I was sitting down at this time getting ready to listen to Imran Khan, and so now I'm talking to you about an attempted coup in the largest state, second largest military, largest nuclear power in the world. I can't believe that this is happening. And what I do think, though, is we need to remember that there is still an ongoing war, which a year ago was considered to be the greatest threat to modern day society since the Second World War. An example that great power in kinetic war is not finished. But what this has done, I think, greatly changed the dynamics on the Eastern Front. Whether or not the Ukrainians will definitely sort of dominate it, I'm not sure, but it's definitely played into their hands. And I want to see how quickly the Russian government can muster up their strategical, initiative to either slow down that counteroffensive or change the war in their favor. Which,
Yeah, we're going to see how that
there's a lot of
develops in the next
questions
few
there.
days, for sure.
So I
I
just
just have
wanted.
a very quick
Go ahead,
update.
Khaleesi.
Sorry. The press service of the governor of Rostov region said about the statement from Prigozhin, who decided to return his fighters to their positions. We suggest waiting for actions and commenting on them, not words. So this is from the governor of Rostov regarding Prigozhin saying he's going to return. We suggest waiting for actions and then commenting on them, not words. Sorry, Dr. Danish, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was going to say
And
that.
Dennis, sorry, I'm sorry. Just on that, but however, Khaleesi, just to kind of separate from that, we are seeing a lot more imagery of what appears to be Russian citizens in Roston
I
cheering kind of
agree.
the
I'm just giving
Wagner
the
and
update. Yeah.
yeah. Sorry. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Danish.
No, it's all good. So, in the time after we spoke with Imran Khan, we have gone through an entirety of emotions. And by the way, congrats to Mario and Suleiman for just and all source for the craziness that has ensued over the past 2 days, the past day and a half. I've slept, I've read, I've done some work and come back, and suddenly the whole world was all over the place. I was just gonna say that when I was on here earlier, we were talking about coups, and so this morning I was thinking about it, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do some research. So there is actually some what we were talking about, which is there are a few things that make coups successful. This had none of them. So this is like the coup de nada that like never happened. And ultimately, when we were looking at this, it would be very interesting to kind of think through some of those things. Nanihal Singh, who's apparently the world expert at Hopkins that studies this, literally laid out all of them. The number one was what we discussed, which is this is the world's slowest moving coup you've ever seen. You don't see coups happen with like announcements and pronouncements and people walking across the country and then walking into the capital. Coups happen in matter of much faster and with a lot more behind closed doors, and all the generals are agreed. The second thing is usually they take over the media, which is not what happened. This is all in Telegram. And then the biggest thing that I said, which I'm going to repeat again, is that civilians do not determine what happens with coups. So I know people keep fighting and saying, well, the people were for it or were against it. None of that matters. What matters is what do all the generals think about coups. You can go Google yourself who Nanihal Singh is. He's literally written multiple books on this topic. The last thing I wanted to say was, there's all this commentary around losing power. Everybody knows I have very strong negative opinions about Russia. So it might come as a surprise. I don't think this weakens Russia in any way. If anything, they have much cleaner alignment. And now people know who's boss. Maybe and as far as Putin himself, ultimately this was bound to happen regardless. Now there's clear, in my opinion, alignment of who is doing what. And this whole
Danish,
premise.
even if Prigozhin receives no consequences whatsoever.
Well, that's my underlying thesis: is that Prigozhin is going to fall out of a window. So that's what I believe.
That's needed. Like if there's no consequences.
Yeah, that's probably what's going to
Dr.
happen.
Danish,
I just want to share some news before we just continue on this conversation. Is
Did
that
Prigozhin fall out of a window?
No. No. So from the Russian Telegram channel, Fighter Bomber, which is very aligned and who's reporting on Russian Air Force, has been fairly accurate. They have a connection with the Russian Air Force, apparently. I'm just going to read it straight. He says at least 12 Air Force pilots were killed as a result of fighting with Wagner PMC. And then we have at least up to 7 helicopters were shot down and 1 AN-22 communication center. So 12 Russian pilots were killed as a result of the fighting per flight bomber telegram.
Right. I just want to
Go
welcome.
ahead.
I just want to welcome. I'm pleased if I pronounce your name wrong, then just tell me. But I want to welcome Timothy. You are you are part of Zelensky's administration. You were an advisor to Zelensky's administration, Minister of Economy. I mean, I'd love to hear your perspective from the Ukrainian side. We've heard Zelensky. He made comments about Putin and how he was hiding. But overall, from an overall perspective, from the Ukrainian side, we saw a possible coup that didn't end up happening. You've seen the Prigozhin's demands, and we're seeing that the coup's now about to end. But would love to hear your thoughts from the Ukrainian side.
Yeah, thank you. It's bizarre, really. So just to clarify, I'm an advisor to his chief of staff, and I was a minister in his first government. I'm not a minister anymore, although I have a number of positions. So I'm speaking in my private capacity, not in the government capacity. With these caveats I think it's really bizarre what has happened and the speed. If it was real, I don't think it's over. It just went under the rug. And my money, my personal, would be on the fact that Prigozhin will be assassinated at some time in the future, not necessarily now, or something else will happen. If, however, it is really a good settlement, or maybe it was some kind of show off, then it is important that, I'm talking from Ukrainian perspective, that Ukraine didn't rush into anything. So because we were very careful in observing what is happening. And of course, there are all kinds of voices suggesting that Ukraine should take an advantage of this. And had it been rushed, you see, that would have been a mistake. So I'm
are
not
you,
sure.
Timothy?
Yeah.
Are you then making the argument? Sorry, and I'm gonna let you
Yeah.
continue.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Are you
Go
then,
ahead.
because a lot of people yesterday were making the argument that this is a false flag in order to basically attack Ukraine, to get them into a false sense of security, and then make them attack and then they can be hit. So are you saying that you actually also think that that is a high possibility, and based on that, that's the reason Ukraine didn't make a move?
So I'm an academic too, so I think in probabilities, in subjective probabilities. I don't put a high probability, but I think two actual, theories in my mind that I would be willing to put probabilities on. This one and the other one that something else will happen. That's not the end of the story, because the power, if the story is true, the power has been challenged. It should be a response beyond that we just negotiated. Okay, especially given the morning speech. Or it has been a false flag. So what are my subjective probabilities? 15-20% on the false flag operation, and 80% on the fact that it's not the end yet.
And so when you look at it now, you've got Prigozhin, who, according to the reports, may be going to Belarus, as will the Wagner Group. How does that impact the war in Ukraine? Because the Wagner Group was successful in Bakhmut, a few other areas. I mean, does this now give Ukraine more of an initiative? Does it change the dynamics of the war? Like, how are you guys seeing it from your perspective?
So again, I'm an economist more than but I was involved in a number of operations or processes at some point when I was in the government. So my knowledge is limited, but it is true that they were powerful and they were ruthless, and it might weaken them, or at least the Russian overall front. But it also, to us, it's a signal, regardless of everything, a signal. There is some processes, dynamic processes inside the Russian military or the force that are destabilizing it. So we will try to amplify those processes through different means we have, and we'll try to take advantage when the time is right, but it doesn't necessarily mean that time is now.
Hey guys, can I get in there real quick?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm speaking to a guy. He's with the Wagner Group. He's in a Brazilian battalion. He's an engineer that specializes in demolition and traps. He's currently in Russia. What he's telling me is that, well, he wants me to read something to you guys. He messaged me. I asked him if he wanted to get a message across, and this is what he told me. The Wagner Group has been fighting bravely on the main fronts of the special operation. However, we are treated like nothing. The high echelons of Russian defense wanted to dissolve us and destroy us. They started this. They betrayed us. We took Bakhmut at great cost, at the cost of many lives and brothers from the Wagner Group. We delivered Bakhmut to the Russian Federation, and we are seeing them on the verge of falling thanks to the corruption of the Russian high command. The ability of Russian leaders to carry out what our brothers won with so much blood is increasingly in doubt. So that's what he's saying. He's also saying a lot of the fighters are very dissatisfied with the decision to retreat, but that's the orders he's just been given. But give me a second here. He's listening to the chat right now. And I asked him if he wanted to speak, but he prefers to stay anonymous. I'll see if that changes. But he wants me to read this in I think it's Portuguese. But I'm going to butcher it, but I'm just going to read it for him. Give me like 30 seconds. O Grupo Wagner tem natura bravamente nas principais frentes da operação especial porém somos tratados como nada o alto escalão de defesa russa que nos desovar e nos destruir eles como isso eles nos trabalham. Tomos Bakhmut com muito custou de muitas vidas e armamos do Grupo Wagner. Entregamos Bakhmut para a Federação Russa e estamos vendo eles na iminência
So Mark,
de.
what if you want to translate that? Because I think most.
I know. He
Yeah.
wanted me to read it. He was insisting on it.
It's just an English audience, so I mean.
I know.
So just for the audience to know, so this is your direct contact in the Wagner group.
So we'll get somebody, I think, to translate it. But I guess Mark, just from your conversations with him, has he given you any impressions of, does this deal feel like a betrayal to the Wagner cause?
What he had said, I asked. He said what he believes is happening is that Russia is delaying this to potentially bring more soldiers over. So that's kind of his take, is that he still thinks that something could happen, but he's been given the orders to return. He was recently, so he was fighting in Bakhmut. He was previously in Syria. They brought him from Syria to Bakhmut to now Russia. So that's his story. If you guys have any questions for me to ask him, shoot him out. I can ask him, and he's more than happy to respond.
Yeah, if he wants to come up and it's a translation issue, we've got a number of people who can translate, so that's not a problem.
Okay.
But yeah, appreciate your words.
Yeah,
Mark.
let me try and get him to talk if he can. Then I think that would be awesome. Oh, he just sent me a message. He sent me his phone number. Hold on.
Okay, so that's fine. So if you can just find that out in the background in the meantime.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
we've got translators for any messages. Go ahead.
Yeah, now just to ask Mark if he can also DM to yourself or All Sorts what he was reading, because then we can get someone to translate it and read it out so that everyone understands it. The message he gave you, Mark.
Yeah, and let me
I'll
go.
send that. Who should I send? Mario, should I send that to you, or
yeah, you can send it to Mario. You can send it to me. You can send it to also. Anyone of those three is fine.
Okay.
Right. So I appreciate that. So let me go to Judges. What you got? You want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quickly. I agree with a lot Dr. Dinesh said earlier. He mentioned that a lot of the things you see when a coup happens, it wasn't really in the equation here. But I think that's kind of what was so surprised a lot of us. We were looking for leadership in the Russian military. We were looking for elements of the bureaucracy to support them. Didn't really see a ton of it. And so, I think that was what kind of shocked a lot of the world when we were watching this. Is given the fact that a lot of those things you mentioned weren't included in this, it's still it moved at a pace that I think shocked a lot of us. But I had a question for you, Ian. Ian, you brought up, you thought that Putin looks a lot better after this. You mentioned that he's in a stronger position. We saw some world leaders who didn't really back him on this. Kazakhstan being one of the examples.
Yeah, they didn't want to play.
So I'm curious. I'm curious on what you think moving forward, kind of what this looks like, because if Prigozhin, I think someone like Patrick or someone brought up the idea that he could retain a base of power, maybe in St. Petersburg, maybe in Rostov, somewhere in that area.
or
How
perhaps
does
in
this make him?
Belarus.
How does this make him look in the long term? I'm assuming, because like to me, like these world leaders not really coming to back him. I'm not sure what to make of this. I wanted to see what your idea
Right,
was in the
yeah,
long
and this
term.
is this is something I posed to Pyotr earlier about how the only two people who came out publicly backing him were Lukashenko and Erdogan. And Erdogan has experience with staging coups. I'm not saying necessarily that Russia did this on purpose, that this whole thing was staged, but it kind of looks that way. I mean, it could have been a psyop 20%. As our Ukrainian friend here just said, 20% psyop, 80%. It is what it is, as it appears to be. I think that a lot of people were, simply.
He said 15% psyop, not 80%
No,
psyop.
I said 20% psyop. I'm not sure what he said necessarily, but anyway, the I think a lot of the neighboring countries, they wanted to see how this whole thing would play out, right? I mean, they didn't come to the Kremlin's backing because it appeared to a lot of people, I think to pretty much everybody in here, that this was going to be a bloody coup. It's going to last for weeks, possibly. I mean, there was a lot of chatter in here. I think Patrick thought that it might last months. Where Wagner forces would be fighting against the Russians. They'd be bogged down in a full scale civil war. There was a lot of chatter about that. I don't think the think tanks agreed with it. I think that most think tanks, like the strategic, I forget the Washington-based one that we quoted several times yesterday, they suggested that this thing would be over pretty quickly, right? That Prigozhin just didn't have the support that he needed to, make his attempt at a rebellion successful, right? That it would ultimately fail, just a matter of when. I don't think a lot of people, even realize that it would end in less than 24 hours. It's literally less than 24 hours. This thing is over. Looking back, like as a retrospective, it's odd, isn't it? I mean, that this coup or rebellion or insurrection, whatever you want to call it, lasted less than 24 hours. It just resolved itself, just like that. Boom, done. Right. I think a lot more people, like world leaders, they would be wise not to underestimate Putin, right? I think I'm not trying to like kiss his ass here or say, oh, he's playing 5D chess. I do think he's playing chess, but maybe it's not 5D chess. I think they need to, reevaluate what they know of Russia and what they know of Putin. I think that it shows that he is capable of bringing this rebellion, if anything, to heel, and that's something worth taking note of. Because I mean, when was the last time this has ever happened? That a coup has happened in 24 hours and it's been shut down in less than that. I don't think there's any
I
precedent in
think your
history.
framing of it is wrong, Ian. I mean, the Wagner group said they wanted the generals out. They said they wanted out of Ukraine, that they were being treated like fodder. Putin gave them what they want, and that's how it ended. I don't see this as like some big, like, strong man, beware of Putin, because he resolved this in 24 hours. He gave them everything they asked for.
Yeah, but what's going to
And that's
happen
why it ended.
to the structure of the MOD? I mean, right now, I mean, he's consolidating a lot of power, and he's also pushing a lot of laws and regulations that change things around
He
that benefits him.
healed to the will of Wagner.
And what's going to happen to them now?
He didn't stand up to them. He healed to them. We don't know what's going to happen
Well,
to
let's
them.
find
He might
out.
wind up in a ditch. But for now, the way that Putin got this to end was by giving them exactly what they asked for.
I totally agree, and I think with one thing Ian is right, is that we do have to wait and see, right? If nothing happens to Prigozhin, then we can start saying that it's a multipolar Russia, and if Prigozhin falls out of a window and accidentally shoots himself twice in the back of the head, then we'll know that Putin didn't forgive him and is going to try to keep going, maybe with his current
But it's
generals or
not even
different
about
ones.
forgiveness,
But
Mickey. Like, look, if
well,
he lets Prigozhin live, or if he
yes.
doesn't even send him to prison, that is
Yes,
just complete weakness anyway. So it's not just about.
that is a sign of weakness, and then we'll know the outcome. I think I totally agree with you. It's a sign of weakness, no matter what. He basically has allowed Prigozhin to dictate to him the terms of of who runs
Mickey,
his military.
compare the speech in the morning to like this reaction. Like, if this was ever going to be the reaction, or even if he thought this could be a possibility, that speech he did in the morning was he went all in,
100%.
extreme, and then so now he's got, in my mind, if Prigozhin lives, or if Prigozhin doesn't go to prison, is probably the best way to say it. Either one of those two,
Yeah.
or there's no consequences. This is just going to give other people initiative that, guess what, we can basically stand up to
Sule,
Putin and there's no
that's
consequences.
exactly right, because Prigozhin is not the only crazy guy with a private army in Russia. Let's not forget. And everyone's going to start getting ideas. This is like the law of the jungle. When the alpha lion looks weak, the other lions start getting ideas. When the gorilla gets weak, the other gorillas start getting ideas. And that's exactly what I think
that
Putin
is a bit of the like from what I understand from reading, that is the Russian psychology. Like,
yes,
it's very different to
absolutely.
Western psychology.
You are correct. Now you understand why Ukraine has to fight the way it does. You're understanding now what the reason
That's a
why
separate point,
you
Mickey. I don't
cannot
agree
show
with you on that one,
weakness.
but
But
Mickey,
let me just say
Mickey,
one.
sorry, just an update to add to what you're saying. Quite apt timing. Briefer reporting, we expect an explosive growth in Prigozhin's rating. He is the people's hero. So I don't think that's going to go down too well.
And I think, and that's an important aspect of Ecclesia. Does Prigozhin actually gain political power because of this? Because of the situation that got up, and then does the people in Russia view him more as a hero compared to President Putin, and he now challenges more on the political side. But the second thing is, I think we cannot ignore the fact that conditions in Russia were conducive for an armed rebellion to initiate. That does not let's wound the clock back to before Russian invasion of Ukraine. The idea that Ukraine would not only mount an effective resistance, but that we would have Russian-backed Ukrainians launching an assault on Belgorod, that we would have Russian border towns being bombarded, that we would have the Kremlin attacked by a drone, and all this happening. And now, as a continuation of this, is the conditions in Russia proper were so permissive for Prigozhin to basically launch an armed rebellion against the institutions of the Russian government. Shoigu and Gerasimov are part of the Russian MOD. They are institutionalized elements within the Russian state. That he launched an armed rebellion and got within less than 200 kilometers from the capital of Moscow before an agreement was made and turned back. I think that is a terrible look for the current state of the
you
Russian
can't
government.
consolidate power any more than Putin already consolidated power. The idea this is like Putin's play to consolidate power, like that's already been consolidated for like 20 years plus. There's no more consolidation that can happen.
And
Right?
Mickey,
He is as
Russia,
I mean,
consolidated
during
as
the
it gets.
moment, it seemed like this was an armed rebellion. This was more, in the end, can we all at least admit that it was more of like a armed tantrum, and that this whole he got close to taking over. I mean, can we just all admit that in the end, he backed down, something happened behind closed doors that none of us know about, and that they're going to move back on with their lives. Well, at least some of them are. Prigozhin probably won't.
Quick question: did he back down though? He got everything he wanted. Those guys.
Yeah, he got everything he wanted, but
if these reports are right, Grasimov and Shogun
sure.
are going to be.
So the kids that Suleiman, kids always get what they want when they throw a tantrum. It's okay. Like, again, ultimately from the outside, without knowing everything, we didn't know what was going on. Maybe the idea was like, hey, I'm coming up there, and he's like, come on up, do whatever the hell you want, and then he brought the whole army with him. I mean, like, I'm sorry, it could have just been that.
But I mean, Putin's speech, I think, undermines that. But I think, Mickey, can I ask you a question? Or you know what, Joy, let me go to you or Mickey.
I actually have a question, all source, that I don't have an answer to, because I'm trying to think of what this implies, right? And what's scary to me now is Wagner's going to be on the border of Poland, and what does that mean for Poland?
I mean, I think
because that's kind of scary thought.
No, I mean, NATO has a significant military presence there, and I think the last thing that anybody wants right now, especially Russia, is to initiate anything that might trigger Article 5.
Yeah, they're not going to.
And I think just to Dom's point, what this is cultural, right? If you want to get something in Russia, you need to show power and strength. He wanted a few things. He wanted his battalion to survive. He wanted Wagner PMC to exist, and he wanted to remove the heads of the Russian military, and he is going to get that. So it's not a coup because
Mickey,
he never said I want to overthrow the
though.
government. He never said
Mickey,
I want to. Yeah, go ahead.
To you, I want to ask you a question specifically on that, though. Like, which is somebody who's probably studied a lot of the nation states. Like, I think it's fair to say that Russia, Putin, and the Russian state no longer have the monopoly of violence, and so that is a clear underestimation of power for the Russian government. As Putin has been very adamant that he wants to maintain this, and now the question that it would become interesting is how does the Duma incorporate laws that make the Wagner part of a independent force of the Russian MOD, and how do they codify that into law necessarily? But because now, again, Russia doesn't have Putin doesn't have the monopoly of violence.
I agree with you. Not only that, there's no cultural lattice work to accommodate for more than one person in power and control and with a monopoly of violence in Russia. There is no cultural lattice work to make that work. They cannot make that work, right? Every day Prigozhin is alive, it's a threat to the throne. And we will see in the next few weeks and days if he survives, because there's no way we can continue. Because, like I said, there's not just one, there's more than one crazy guy with a private army in Russia, but so far they've all bent the knee to Putin. This is the first time someone said, you know what, actually, I'm not getting what I want. I'm just going to march my army up to Moscow and I'm going to get it. And other people are going to start getting ideas. So Suleiman is absolutely correct that Prigozhin, every day he survives, is a finger in the eye to the Kremlin. And everybody in Russia knows it.
Khaleesi, have you got an update?
I have, very quickly. So this is from Brief, and I'm going to read it word for word. From the evening news of the state TV channels, amongst other incomprehensible things, not a word about Shoigu. Putin may make a new address today. Earlier, Peskov said that Putin would not be present at the Scarlet Cells in St. Petersburg.
Yeah, and that's important because if Putin does do another speech, we will stream it live and we will discuss it. But I mean, watch out for that. It's going to be important. And let's see how he addresses the speech, because his earlier speech today, he went all in. He talked about how Prigozhin was had committed treason. He had betrayed the nation and so on and so forth. So let's see how this goes. But Ian, what's your thoughts about what Mickey is saying? Because Mickey, do you agree with the argument that essentially he has no choice? If Prigozhin, if there's no consequences to Prigozhin, and on top of that, he's basically demoted Grazimov and Shogo, then you're basically, Prigozhin's won. He's got what he wanted. Ian?
I think it was a tantrum. I'm inclined to agree with what Dr. Dinesh said. I do think there will be some form of consequences. Perhaps they'll put him on the front lines again. Why not? He is still a private military contractor.
The thing is, there's always more than one private army, right? Gazprom has an army, Kadyrov has an army. All of a sudden, you don't this is what Russia needs is stability, and they need one person in charge. That's the only way the system works, how it's been designed.
Let's game this out, right?
I guarantee
let's game this out. Let's put our our thoughts in the minds of the commanders of these PMCs. What are they thinking happened here? They're all probably just as confused as we are, right? When it comes to this situation, they may be thinking, perhaps that Prigozhin had some form of official sanction to do what he did, to throw his tantrum and to make a point, but they won't, right? If they do the same thing he did, they might actually just be obliterated in a heartbeat. We don't know that, right? And they're not gonna take that gamble, take that risk to try to do what Prigozhin did. I don't think that this is going to set some precedent to where other PMCs will step up and try to do the same thing. I think that if anything, especially after this peace deal, right? This agreement that they're agreeing to, I think they're gonna think twice if they had these ideas of doing what he did and joining in a rebellion or doing something similar. I think right now they're questioning whether that would be even wise. Perhaps
I agree with you. I agree they're going to think twice, but before they wouldn't even think once. And that is that's a huge beginning of a shift.
I don't know. I mean, early on, when all this was happening, we saw a Storm Z battalion. That's an MOD sanctioned mercenary brigade in Ukraine right now, down the front lines. I mean, they voiced their support for Prigozhin, but then all this happened. I mean, those guys are going to see some shakeup, right? I mean, they did voice support for it,
yes.
So they are probably.
But what you're seeing, I agree. But what it is going to be just a recipe for instability, right? If this is all a power game and Putin a power game, then Putin is going to be purging the leadership of his own military. If this is Prigozhin's idea to get what he wants, then they're going to have to kill this guy and find him. And so all you're seeing now is more and more instability in Russia. If you're Beijing, you're on the phone with the Kremlin right now, being like, "What the fuck is going on here? Like, what the hell is this?" We would have appreciated a heads up.
I just have something.
Just jump in whenever there's news.
Okay, so Russian military influencers are praising Prigozhin for wisdom to not shed blood, and they blame the Russian MOD for forcing Wagner heroes to start a coup. There are now calls for an investigation into treason amongst the MOD leadership based on Wagner troops' testimonies. and this is from Global Intel.
That's fascinating.
And I'm going to add on to that. Here's another report.
Sorry, Zelensky is giving a
Okay.
live speech at the moment, and I've just put on Sky News, and he's saying Russia's situation shows no one is in control.
So I'm going to read another one from Ocean Defender, just a tweet of his, but he kind of puts everything around. Lots of claims. So this is a quote from Ocean Defender. Lots of claims going around right now regarding, depending who you ask, either the current or former Russian Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, who some have stated has already been arrested by the Federal Security Services, though right now it just appears to be rumors. And so I think this continues to show that we don't have a clear picture of what's currently going on within the Russian MOD. As Khaleesi highlighted, a lot of Russian military bloggers are actually praising Prigozhin. And so I think, we're having a conversation about Putin, and I understand that. But if you're the Russian MOD right now, and a private military corporation can dictate how command relationships need to go, who should be in charge or not, promotions or demotions of Russian senior officers and generals, all of this and how they achieved it. And now Russian military bloggers now view Prigozhin as more influential and as a hero and view the Russian MOD as traitors that they need to be spied upon. If you're in the Russian army, what the hell are you fighting for right now? And how that can also undermine, because Putin has heavily depended upon the Russian military, the National Guard, and the Ministry of Interior to maintain control. Prigozhin just pushed through all of them, specifically the Russian Ministry of Interior and the National Guard, to show that they're incapable of maintaining security inside. So overall, in all, Prigozhin right now, from everything we're seeing, is clearly being shown as the hero for Russia. And if his popularity continues to grow, it will be a challenge to Putin, as he's already been challenged already.
And I also think, if you're a power player in Russia at the moment, are you more or less likely now to try to outfit yourself, your own private military? I think you're much more likely now because you don't know exactly what's going on, but you understand one thing and one thing only. If I'm the last person with a private military, I'm on the table for dinner. And I sort of I think that right now it is too early to say, but all I can say is the outcome here is disorganization and chaos. And I certainly, if I was Shoigu, I'd be very worried about my future. Maybe he already knows it. And likewise, these Wagner soldiers, which I think there was a gentleman here was speaking to one, sort of like saying like, well, I'm not really sure what's going on. I was supposed to go to Moscow, and I was really happy to do that because I was really upset about the Russian military for screwing us over. But now I'm going this place. It's like really unclear who's in charge and what the plan is. And I really think the Kremlin here, there's a power vacuum here. The Kremlin really should be out in front of this, and they don't seem to be. It all seems to be like sort of you're hearing rumors here and there. There's no clear statements on what's going to happen, no plan, and that's unusual. That's not usually what you get from.
So, Mickey, do you think
government.
this? And Ian, I want you to answer to this question first, but I'll just continue with Mickey, and then Ian, please answer to this. If you're a Russian MOD general right now and you're seeing that Prigozhin gets to dictate, do you believe a possibility that the Russian military might actually initiate a coup in and of itself against Putin because they believe that Putin does not have their back? Do you believe that is more likely
No,
or
I
less
don't
likely?
think that's
I want
very
Mickey
likely.
and then Ian to answer.
Yeah, no.
I don't think that's likely either, but I think that Shoigu thinks he's probably fucked. I think he thinks he's dead. And then what do you do when you're backed in the corner? Bad things. So if I were anyone affiliated with Shoigu right now, I'd be super concerned because they're doing the same calculation as we are doing. Like,
It's
okay, was this Putin's idea? Was it not Putin's idea? Am I screwed? I was acting in the interest of Putin. We had a lot of conversations here. So it's nothing but chaos, right? There's some people getting out of town. I have friends in Moscow now. They're packing their bags. It's nothing. There's no clear leadership, and if I were Shoigu, I'd be very worried about my future.
So they're speaking of Moscow, they're clearing out all of the blockades APCs have left. They're lifting all of the chains that were there previously put in place to stop the coup from happening. It's Moscow's cleared up. As for your question, if you're in the MOD, if you're like a regular ranking officer, I don't think you need to worry about anything. But if you are someone who's high up and you are affiliated with Shoigu, then you probably do need to worry about a purge because this is exactly what it is. I don't think it's going to end well for for a lot of officers who just don't command or respect of their soldiers, right? I mean, that's Shoigu basically, right? I mean, who did anyone follow his orders? I think that people do so begrudgingly because they're part of the military command and the structure. But in general, I don't think the MOD just as a top-down organization has the confidence of the people it's supposed to work for. So that's the reason why
Just to
shake up.
Ian's point, just to Ian's point as well, you have to look at the word. Something we've completely missed in a lot of these conversations is what was Prigozhin saying publicly before he went and he went to Moscow. Not only did he say that Wagner was butchered in Ukraine, he was also saying that the entire reason for the invasion of Ukraine was Shoigu's plan to try to get a promotion and try to enrich himself in Ukraine. That there was the Nazism thing was nonsense. These are Prigozhin's own words, and the entire invasion of Ukraine was a gigantic mistake. Right, so that is one of the reasons that he went to Moscow, was to kind of take revenge for this catastrophic invasion of Ukraine, and that is sort of being buried here in the sort of this is Prigozhin wasn't trying to take out Putin. He was angry at Shoigu for the invasion of Ukraine, and he said that the only reason they did it was Shoigu wanted to enrich himself in eastern Ukraine, in Donetsk and Luhansk. So that's an incredible admission from somebody, and if that seems to be bubbling under the surface as well. So who knows what's going to happen in the next weeks and months if Prigozhin survives?
Actually,
I've got
Patrick,
an
if
update.
go ahead, Khalid.
Sorry, Mickey. All sorts. A source close to PMC Wagner, and this is a statement. I find it quite conflicting. But anyway, in addition to the resignation of Shoigu, it is also planned to replace a number of SFB generals, including the head of the SFB for Moscow and the Moscow region, Alexei Dorofeev. Today, the Moscow defense system passed a stress test in case of a sudden invasion of the armed forces of Ukraine in the direction of Moscow. None of the heads of the UFSB, including the capital, did not pass this test. And if Prigozhin had not turned around, then shedding blood, as he puts it, he would have entered Moscow. Further, with such a leaky defense system, the war with Ukraine cannot be continued. Now there will be serious reshuffles both in the Ministry of Defense and in the FSB.
Okay, I'm sorry. Wait, but who's making that statement that the Russia's invasion of Ukraine cannot be continued? Do we know exactly who's quoting this?
No, it just says a source close to PMC Wagner.
Okay, well, actually, so it's PMC Wagner. Mickey, as you perfectly said, I think that ties into Prigozhin's claims earlier about the whole Ukraine war was a mistake. And if Prigozhin is clearly now having the narrative and having increased popularity, we've seen the citizens of Rostov screaming, clapping and chanting Wagner, Wagner when they're pulling out. I think people need to be very aware of how much political power Prigozhin has. But Patrick, if you're still there, I do want to ask you a specific question, because a lot of this, when this first came out, was Shoigu and Gerasimov. Right now, the conversation is clearly on Shoigu, but Gerasimov has a very important role in the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as he not only is the Russian chairman of the general staff, but he's also the overall commander for Russia's invasion in Ukraine and military operations in Ukraine. I guess the question is, do you believe, Patrick, that Gerasimov will stay in power, will still be commander? And if not, how do you think that might impact the command infrastructure and the command and control network of Russia in Ukraine? Patrick, if you're not there? Okay. No, I guess not. I don't know if Mickey, if you want to try to answer that question yourself, or we can move to a different topic.
I just think right now we're in a state of like, if you were in the leadership of the Ministry of Defense of Russia, you're just like, okay, am I about to get thrown out of a window, or am I about to plan the invasion of Ukraine? Is Wagner PMC going to be around, or are they not? Or should we depend on them here? Like, it's like, in 24 hours we've seen a complete sort of toppling of the power, potentially the toppling of the Russian military power structure, which has existed for decades, and a calling into question of the invasion of Ukraine, which the entire public was on board with. But all of a sudden, this one leader of this private military contract group, who's apparently getting lauded by Russian military bloggers, is saying, no, sorry, that entire thing was a mistake. The casualties he was also saying that casualties on the Russian side are far greater than anyone was letting on. And he also said that the purpose of the invasion was simply to enrich a few of these corrupt oligarchs, and had nothing to do with the initial claims coming from the Kremlin. So, this is just the beginning of a narrative that may grow in Russia. And what's going to happen at that point? If your brother or father, or if yourself was conscripted and find yourself in a trench in Bakhmut, what are you going to think about this? And what you're going to probably want to take revenge against the people like Shoigu as well. So it's just the beginning of this. And right now, nobody knows who's in charge. And where is the Kremlin on this? Where is Putin? He should be out in front of this. He's really not. And that's uncharacteristic of a leader like Vladimir Putin.
So, Dr. Snickerton, I know you just joined, and I believe this maybe I think the first time you speak on this specific topic right now. I don't know if we had you earlier this evening. I'd like to get your initial opinion and your reaction to kind of what happened in the last 12 hours, and where do you believe is the future state of kind of Russian politics with Putin, Prigozhin, and Shoigu/Gerasimov?
Well, I mean, one thing that is apparent is that Putin still commands like broad, I guess, respect from the various political elites within the country. But at the same time, it just kind of showed that this is Putin's style. He kind of kicks the can down the road. I mean, 2014, right? You know, the original Ukraine conflict, the Donbass war. He kicked the can to 2022, and this thing is essentially kicking the can down the road. He originally there's all this kind of speculation of how Wagner might be disbanded or cannot exist in its current form, but in the end, it just seems like a weird return to status quo. The Wagners will be kind of semi-exiled to Belarus, but the Prigozhin won't be charged, and everybody just kind of. And I think there will be, it's not confirmed, but there might be some replacement at the MOD. And like in the end, like it just keeps going. It just keeps going. But here's the thing: like eventually, there will be a kind of reckoning or another kind of match between the central government and these sort of parallel armed formations. Like this, throughout history, like these kinds of arrangements have never been stable. Whenever you're relying on like a vassal army or a proxy army that you're basically depending on for a large part of your like combat power, and the late Roman Empire, found this out many times. Like, yeah, you have to you basically had to renegotiate that relationship, sometimes very
Can I
violent.
ask you a question? Can I ask you a question from your expertise? Like, why didn't Putin just meet Wagner like in force with a bunch of tanks right outside of Rostov? Why did he let him drive up to Moscow? Why not just show up with a giant army and a bunch of tanks and then have the conversation and negotiate? Why did he let him go all let this thing go on for so long?
Well, the same reason, for example, why Russia has not had a general mobilization. I mean, why people are saying, why haven't they gone full war economy? Russia, for whatever, for better, for worse, like its political elite has decided that we're going to try to maintain a kind of level of normalcy, right? And if you just bring a gigantic army into Moscow, and then you're going to have this potential gigantic, battle kick off at the gates of Moscow, that would be shocking to people. That would be potentially destabilizing to the stability. I mean, they want everything on an even keel. So yeah, they mobilize, but only do a partial mobilization of reservists, and they do war economy, but they're not spending, more than like 6% of their GDP. Like, so all these things are just, this is Putin's style. He likes to keep things like moderated. It's to some people it's frustrating, and obviously, and you look at his whole history, like how he has these frozen conflicts in Georgia, in Armenia, Azerbaijan. Like these are the things. Like there's never really a resolution because the whole style of the Russian government in the last 20 years has been to sort of keep kicking the can down the road until it's absolutely unavoidable, which was, in the case of Ukraine, I guess. But this is another one of these things. It's a kick down the road, and we'll see what Prigozhin can do next year, say in the elections, if he has political ambitions, or in the future if he becomes like a power broker to other politicians, or if even like other PMCs spawn because of this precedent that's already established. Like, if you have a private formation, you can violently negotiate your contract with central government. Overall, it's not a great look. I mean, there's no way to spin it. It's not a great look, but Russia keeps ticking for another at least another couple of years like this, and the war's not going to end because it looks like everybody's going back to their jobs.
Colonel, you've got your hand up. Go ahead. What's your thoughts? And before I go to you, Colonel, there's one point, and actually, I'd like to hear your thoughts and then Ian's thoughts on this. Another way of looking at it is, because obviously we've talked about how this makes him look weak. On the other hand, doesn't this actually make it look like he's got a lot of support by his government, by the close allies? Because if there was any point that it was time to take out the king, to take out Putin, it was now. And yet, other than Prigozhin going towards Moscow, this was the best time for people to turn on him, and yet no one did. No one tried to take him out.
Right.
What are your thoughts, Colonel?
I mean, that's the thing. He commands a lot of respect. And as you said, like, he could have done this by mobilizing a massive army and meeting Prigozhin and then staring him down with a gun barrel of tank. But he didn't, because that's not his style. I mean, for better or for worse, he's a politician that likes to maintain his sense of like civilian normalcy, which is just like, I guess, one of his personality quirks and one of his limitations, so to speak. But yeah, but the thing is, the reality is too, like, the old man commanded tremendous respect. Basically, nobody sided with Wagner. Everybody was saying, like, all the regional governors, all the like units of the military, they're all saying we support the supreme commander, right? And this kind of influenced Wagner to step down. But I do think that Russia gave Prigozhin too many concessions in this negotiation.
For sure. Let me ask Colonel the same question. Colonel, what's your thoughts on what Dr. Snekos just said? Snekotron. Colonel, bottom left.
Yeah, I'm here. So I'm with Mario and Suleiman and all sorts. First of all, I want to congratulate you guys. I think you got it 90% right, and there was information flowing so fast, it was ridiculous. So congratulations to you three. I'm gonna call it a day, but I will tell you this, right? And this is my opinion. So if anyone wants to argue, that's fine. I don't care. I don't want to argue. I'm just going to tell you my opinion. My opinion is this isn't over, and it's not over for two reasons. The first reason is, as a guy who is a senior diplomat in the United States, Embassy Corps, and was working security agreements with Russia and Putin, I will tell you he's only kept maybe 10 to 20% of them. So the idea that he's going to keep this agreement, I think, is ludicrous. I mean, he's got a track record that he doesn't. By the way, part of that track record is actually with Prigozhin, when he kept promising he'd give him more ammunition and he didn't. Prigozhin's seen this trick before 4 or 5 times over the last 6 months. Second issue is this, right? For all the people who keep thinking that this is over, your big issue is, and the blatant thing that's smacking you in the face is, there's an expectation that Gerasimov and Shoigu just go silently into the night. They will not, okay? They have been wronged. They are Russian. Their face has been challenged, and they are going to come out swinging. This is going to hurt Russia. It is not over. So, again, you three guys, it was great seeing you. Ian, I always love debating with you. Make it great seeing you. I'm going to call it a night, but we can mark this, tag this part, Mario, and you guys can bring it back to me in 3 months when, peace is broken out and tell me that I'm an asshole, and I'm good with that. But I'm just, I don't see it being done.
All right.
So
And I
actually,
appreciate
so
your
I
time
want
on
to,
this.
Suleiman, I want to share something. So I want to share something because people on Twitter are highlighting there appears to be right now, if either an ADSB or flight radar, there is a Russian Air Force plane that just took off from Moscow currently, and it's a Russian Air Force IL-62M. It took off, departed 20 minutes ago, and it does not have its final destination, but it is leaving. Some on Twitter, and I have it right here, and I'm tracking it right now on Flat Radar. It does look like that this might be, so we're seeing again the continuation of still exodus within Moscow. This specific Russian Air Force, this might be tied to some agreements, because maybe instead of Shoigu being arrested, it might be just a quiet, retire and exile somewhere else around the world. Don't ever come back. But I think that, again, we got to get a lot of these information since he tracked this until we get official comments from Russian media on exactly what is going on and what agreement was implemented.
Ian, your thoughts on what I said?
Yeah. So before I get into my thoughts on that, I just want to do a slight pushback on what Colonel said. Obviously we disagree on the bigger issues, but regarding the ammunition, CNN is actually reporting that that a senior intelligence official in the U.S. Has told them that the ammunition shortage was in fact a ruse. The ammunition shortage that Wagner claimed that it was facing in Bakhmut was actually a ruse, and that they were stockpiling ammunition. So that's the latest report on that one. What was your question again, Suleiman?
Ian, sorry, let me
They're like
just
2 hours late.
Sorry, just quickly. And it's not only one. I'm going through all the Russian, and I'll keep on going, but I'm actually tracking currently 3 Russian Air Force jets, a Tu-134AK, and 2 of those. So I'm tracking right now. Let me continue looking in, but I think right now we have 3 Russian Air Force jets are departing Moscow at this time with an unknown final destination.
Yeah. Suleiman, what was the question again?
The question was to you that, look, another way of looking at this is this was an apt moment for people within the Russian government to turn on Putin. This was the best time to take out the king, and yet they all stood firm with him. And other than this and other than Prigozhin obviously going after him, no one turned on him, and this was the best time to do so. If anything, it shows that he's got extreme loyalty
Yes.
amongst the government. I mean, what's your thoughts
Yeah,
on
I
that?
mean, my thoughts are exactly how you summed it up. The only voices that we could hear that were speaking out against Putin and saying that now's the time to take him out were not even Zelensky said that, right? I don't think he even said that. I think he just wanted chaos. Was the opposition party that's, I guess, living in exile or whatever, right? The opposition leader, who's probably just one woman in her apartment, who making that claim, saying that Wagner needs to go in, that the Russian people need to stand up. This is your chance to rid yourself of the shackles of the Putin regime, blah blah blah, right? That obviously never happened. Everybody stood behind Putin. The soldiers stood behind him. The governor stood behind him. The military, the police, every single person. So, if anything, like I said, he has consolidated his power here and shown not just to the world but to the Russian people that he has the full backing, not only of the establishment but also, the opposition parties in Russia. Like I saw the Communist Party, who is in opposition to Putin's party. They backed him, right? They backed him 100% of the way. They called him the supreme commander, and they said that this coup needs to be shut down, et cetera, et cetera. We are all Russians. They, like, every single person that I saw who made a statement on this, in Russia, as well as his allies, were firmly behind him, and they simply repeated all of the rhetoric that he had spoken during his speech. Not a single one of them stood out of line, tried to step up and say, "Yeah, now's the time to take him out." He did not show weakness here, and they did not sense any weakness from him, because if they did, I'm sure they would have taken him out. But they didn't, right? And they know better, and it's probably good for them that they took their positions.
So, Suleiman, just more.
I don't get this.
Hold on,
Like
but Joe,
this
just give me a
super
second.
pro
Jimmy,
Russian.
just wait, Joe, and then I'm going to push it on to Khaleesi also. So
Yeah.
I'm tracking a total of 7. I just did it right now. 7 Russian Air Force jets are just left recently within the last 30 minutes. Moscow. 7 Russian jets have just vacated Moscow. Go ahead, Khaleesi.
How big are
Thanks.
these jets?
Thanks, all sorts. Sorry, Mickey. So the president of Venezuela condemned the irrational threat of a rebellion, quoting Wagner. Pentagon says that the U.S. will stay in close coordination with allies and partners as the situation continues to develop. So I think the Pentagon still expects this to develop, or maybe someone's not really updated Biden. And the Kremlin says it doesn't know where Prigozhin is as of now. And the Kremlin's also issued a further statement saying Wagner fighters who did not take part in the march will sign contracts with the Defense Ministry. I don't know what those contracts are about. But also, in addition, Sky News is reporting that Prigozhin, he's saying on the record, the reason why he turned back was because he didn't want bloodshed, which personally to me, I can't imagine you take action like you did. And then you say, but I didn't want bloodshed, because obviously, there's a purpose to this. Kremlin is now saying Prigozhin will move to Belarus. This is a statement from the Kremlin. Prigozhin will move to Belarus. So go ahead, Mickey. Sorry to interrupt you again.
No problem. I was just asking all sorts how these jets that are leaving Moscow, are these fighter jets? Are these small passenger jets? Are these huge?
These are all. It looks like they're all jets, and some of them are smaller passengers. Like they're all they're pretty big. I mean, you have IL-62s. That's just like a normal passenger jet. Let me just see. Same, a smaller passenger jet. But these are all passenger jets from the Russian Air Force that have left. Well, this one they're basically, for the most part, it looks like they're all in one way, shape, or form. I had to go each one, but passenger jets. And there's a lot of chatter on Twitter saying if this is part of the agreement or what's going on, why all these Air Force jets are now vacating Moscow currently.
And they all seem to be going in the same direction, right? It looks like, from what I can see.
So right now, I see a lot are heading east and a couple are heading south. But if somebody can go to ADSB and see, and if you guys can DM it to me, if they show lists their final destination, but on Flight Radar, all of them are listing as final destination not available. So they're not progressing their final destination, at least from Flight Radar 24. If anybody gets information that confirms their final destination, let me know. But I think we're just going to have to track them and see where they all finally go and see if this is something significant or not. I don't want people to draw one conclusion or another. It's just something, I think, an important information with everything that's gone in the last couple of hours.
So Peskov was asked whether Putin still trusts the head of Ministry of Defense, and Peskov's response was, "I'm not aware of any changes in this regard." Doesn't sound very promising. What do you think?
Well, he's not
Peskov
aware.
said that. Peskov, well, I mean, so Peskov just said openly right now that he is not aware of any changes in the Russian MOD.
No, so the actual question was asked to him was, does Putin still trust the head of the MOD? And his response was, "I'm not aware of any changes in this regard."
I mean, maybe he doesn't want to jump the gun. Maybe this is because I believe Putin is going to announce he's going to have a speech soon, right? I think I remember hearing that. Do we know exactly what
That's a rumor.
Time we're just checking, and I've got the news on. So as soon if it comes on Sky News or any of the channels that I'm watching, I'll just interject straight away and we'll stream it because they will be putting it in English. So we're just waiting. We have no idea, but we're just waiting all sorts.
And if you remember, not too long ago, there was a press op between Shoigu and Putin, and I think most sort of experts at the time were saying that Putin was giving an extreme cold shoulder, not only in body language but in words, towards Shoigu himself in public, and sort of dressing it was sort of a more subtle way of dressing him down. Many people suggesting it was related to what Putin believes is a failed effort in the war in Ukraine.
I got some breaking news also. Sorry. So just from TASS, the Russian state media, quote, "The criminal case against Prigozhin will be dropped and he will move to Belarus," Kremlin says, quoting TASS.
If you are Belarus and you're Lukashenko, you are certainly not happy about that. You don't want 25,000 private military contractors loyal to Evgeny Prigozhin living in your country. Like, that is a recipe for disaster. I cannot imagine anyone in Belarus is happy about that.
That's part of the deal. And this is a statement from Peskov. The criminal case against Prigozhin will be dropped. He will go to Belarus. That's directly from Peskov himself.
I mean, that's basically Putin saying, "I'll give you Belarus if you promise to leave."
I said that earlier, and he went further because he was asked, Peskov was asked, what's he going to do in Belarus? And he said, "I don't know what he's going to do."
Whatever he wants.
Yeah,
do whatever he wants.
But what I can tell you is the authorities will not persecute those Wagnerites who took part in the rebellion, given their frontline merits. Don't know what Prigozhin's going to do in Belarus, but we will present the most combat-ready army in the world to Belarus. Or is it a Trojan horse? I don't know.
He is going to do whatever he wants to do. It's like, what does, where does a 10,000-pound gorilla poop in the woods? Anywhere it wants. Prigozhin can do whatever he wants in Belarus. And what it sounds like to me is, I'm speculating here, is Putin said, "Look, I'll give you what you want, and I'll give you Belarus. How about you go home?" And he said, "Okay." And that's what it sounds like. There's nobody in Belarus can do anything about Prigozhin doing anything. So he's well-armed, well-trained, well-equipped, way better equipped than anyone in Belarus. If I was Lukashenko, I would be super unhappy about that.
Let me go to Haz. What's your thoughts on what we've been discussing, this events that have occurred over the last 22 hours? Would love to hear your overall thoughts.
So the decisive element in any kind of conflict within Russia, first of all, I think an anti-war position would be a non-starter. The liberal position of opposing the patriotic cause, so to speak, I don't think has much potential, never had much potential. Prigozhin, if I were to guess, would have had an ability to pose an internal security threat based on this kind of, spontaneous, almost populistic appeal to the patriotic sentiments of Russian soldiers, specifically in the Russian army, against the so-called oligarchs and against the so-called corruption. His rhetoric was actually the most surprising thing in my view, where he seemed to speak against the legitimating cause of the special military operation, not necessarily condemning the patriotic cause, but basically saying that, the people of Donbass were betrayed and so on and so forth. So I think this is an element that's being underlooked. And those Western liberal commentators who wanted the victory of Wagner, I think really don't understand where this conflict was coming from, at least at the level of anyone who might support Wagner. We don't really know what Prigozhin's motives are or who's supporting him or who's backing him. But his ability to speak to masses, his ability to actually get support from which it decisively has to be the Russian military, is not coming from some kind of pro-Western side. It's actually the complete opposite. But overall, I think all of Russian civil society, as many have said already, including the opposition, seemed to stand behind the legal system of Russia, the legal procedures of the Russian state. And I don't think Russian people are interested in any kind of wild military coup. As far as
let me ask you a question, yeah? So what about this situation where it looks like Prigozhin's going to go to Belarus? It looks like there's an agreement about possibly demoting Gerasimov and Shoigu. If these things happen, does that, in your mind, make Putin look weak?
No, I don't necessarily think it does. I think Putin's relationship to the cause of the event appears, as surprisingly as that may seem, to be a little bit limited, right? This was really aimed at Shoigu and the Ministry of Defense. Prigozhin, at least until Putin himself decided to intervene with his speech, didn't really, as we know, target Putin. I think Putin came out looking strong. He rallied the entirety of Russian civil society, all of the legitimate voices of Russian political society, including the opposition, against this. And
It's on Sky News. I'm just going to stream it quickly.
These people who are responsible will certainly be brought to justice on behalf of our people. Restrictive measures have been taken in Moscow, the Moscow region, and lots of other regions. The situation around Rostov remains, however, very complicated. As President of Russia and Commander-in-Chief, as a citizen of Russia, I am doing everything to repel this attack and to ensure the freedom and security of our citizens. Those who mutiny have betrayed Russia, and I urge anybody involved in it to cease any kind of part in armed conflict. Russia is waging a very difficult struggle for its sovereignty, and particularly helped, of course, by the propaganda machine of the West. We are fighting for the security of our people, for the right to be and remain Russia as a state. This is a lethal threat to our state, to our nation. It is a strike against our people and our state. And the punishment for this monstrous activity will be very harsh.
The punishment for this activity. That's a speech from earlier.
That's just yeah, that's a speech from yesterday, right?
Yeah, it's from yesterday. That's not a new speech. No, it's yesterday's speech.
Yeah, that's a speech from yesterday.
It's quite surprising, guys, because I was just going to interject earlier to say that Peskov had released a statement saying there's going to be no new televised address by Putin. And I read that in two different places. So I thought, okay, chill. And it just started all of a sudden unannounced.
That's not, that's yesterday's speech.
That's yesterday's speech, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
The one from earlier.
It is from
yesterday.
yesterday. Yeah, it's not the new speech. This is her remarks yesterday.
Okay, well, that's fine then. So what Peskov has said, he said, Moscow appreciates Lukashenko's mediation efforts. No new televised address by Putin is planned. Personnel changes in the Ministry of Defense are the prerogative of the President of the Russian Federation and were hardly discussed during contacts to resolve the rebellion. Putin continued to work in the Kremlin all day. No changes on the subject of Putin's trust in the defense minister are known. The situation with the rebellion will not affect the course of the special operation in any way. Lukashenko offered himself as a negotiator, as he's known Prigozhin for more than 20 years. The evening conversation between Putin and Lukashenko was lengthy, frank, warm, and very constructive. Lukashenko's mediation efforts were implemented to avoid bloodshed. And the last one is, it is impossible to say exactly when the CTO regime, this is the counterterrorism regime, will be lifted. Now there will be all the prerequisites before removal.
So let me go to Live Monitor for his thoughts. But just before I do, just want to thank every single person who's contributed to this. We've been going now for between the Imran Khan space and interview and this space, we've been going for 24 hours straight. So awesome job by the team in the back. Awesome job by All Source, Mario, everybody else who's contributed, Ian, all the panelists, Khaleesi, Mickey, every single person, Patrick. Hope I haven't missed anyone, but yeah, I appreciate everybody's contribution to giving people live updates about what's happening with in-depth analysis from various angles of positions. So much appreciated. Live, I'd love to hear your thoughts about the events that have been occurring over the last 22 hours.
Well, I mean, I think everybody needs to take a step back here and look at this logically. I mean, Wagner, they have maybe 5 to 10,000 troops inside of Russia at the moment, with subpar armaments, and a billionaire that's barely a billionaire trying to fund this whole thing. I just, to make a story that these guys were going to march into Russia, into Moscow, depose Putin, and change the Ministry of Defense, and so on and so forth, of all these other comments coming out of the media today, it's just it's a little bit silly, really. Nothing happens with Wagner without Putin or his inner circle absolutely signing off on it. They're the ones really supporting Wagner financially and with military arms. So let's try to look at this a little bit more objectively and a little bit more logically. I really don't like these doomsday commentary from people, saying that Putin's fleeing Moscow, Putin's going to be deposed. I've seen comments saying Putin's going to be dead by, the evening and whatnot. Coups are no joke. Usually they are very violent. They're very quick. The bloodshed is, tremendous, and they go after the leadership. And they did none of these things. It was a slow roll up to Moscow, where the leader of Wagner was making telegram declarations and whatnot. And I really didn't take it seriously to begin with. I mean, this was nothing more than a staged event for Putin to justify changing some things in the Ministry of Defense, probably some opposition that he was
Can I ask
facing.
you a question? If that's the case, why did Putin let Prigozhin shoot down 4 of his helicopters?
Seven helicopters.
I'm
and 1
sorry,
aircraft.
seven helicopters. That would be the greatest air defeat in the history of Russia since World War II.
And 1 IL-22 communications center plane as well.
Okay, that's understandable, and I can understand why people would think that. But let's just be, let's take this a little bit more, let's bring this down to earth a little bit. You cannot control everybody all the time, and of course you're going to have little skirmishes here and there, because that's just
But
the way.
you literally just said that they don't make a move without Putin. Now you're saying they can't control everyone.
You don't make a move when it comes to the top decisions. You cannot control the guys on the ground shooting at helicopters all the time. There's going to be skirmishes without question. You can't.
That's not a skirmish. That's the greatest air defeat in Russia's history since World War II. That's not a small thing. I mean, 7 helicopters plus an airplane. I mean, that's not small.
And it's a communication airplane, which is vital for command and control for Russia, that utilizes that to control the battlefield. That plane was deployed to ensure command and control of the forces fighting Wagner and to get the situation. Wagner saw it, said that is a threat. If we want to maintain military superiority and degrade Russia's combat power, we need to shoot that down. They don't have that many of those flying around. That's a critical asset for any air force, and they lost it in this fight.
Well, might
that's not shot down by some rogue.
So who does this show?
Some rogue agent.
It shows the world that Russia's military, or even its mercenaries, are capable of taking down attack helicopters and a plane that try to engage its forces.
I don't understand how's that relevant to Putin trying to use this as a way to solidify control, so that then Wagner can demonstrate its military powers that I thought they already demonstrated when they seized Bakhmut. Look, this was an armed rebellion by Prigozhin. He wanted to go to Moscow. Putin caved, gave all in his demands, basically. So then Prigozhin said, okay, I'm out. I got what I want. I don't want to go further than this, and I'm going to go to Belarus now. And now Lukashenko, who is hoping that Prigozhin doesn't do the same to him, because if Prigozhin does this in Belarus, Prigozhin is president of Belarus.
Yeah, and I think the story about Putin consolidating power, it doesn't make sense to me, because he's already consolidated power, unless you're telling me that Putin wasn't really in control of things, which I don't buy that. So why would he need to consolidate power? He's already consolidated. Why would he want to lose? Why would he want to have his, if you're the commander in chief and you're allowing your soldiers to get killed, doesn't make a lot of sense. Doesn't make you look good. I think,
Yeah, but no
best
one
case
got killed.
scenario.
No one got killed,
Yeah.
is it?
12 Russian pilots were killed, Suleiman. 12 Russian pilots died.
Okay, okay. Ian and, can I ask you both a question, Ian and Mickey? This rebellion, whatever you want to call it, was started, and now Prigozhin's backed off, saying, "Oh, I'm backing off because I didn't want bloodshed." We know that Putin, as you say, he's consolidated all this power. Then what the hell was this about? I mean, you don't start something like this and then say, "Oh, but I didn't want bloodshed. That's why."
Prigozhin didn't want to fall under the MOD. Prigozhin
He didn't want to fall under the MOD. He didn't want to lose Wagner, and he didn't want Shoigu to run the MOD. So he got everything he wanted. Plus, he got a country. Pretty good deal if you're getting Prigozhin. He walked out of this unscathed, didn't lose a single one of his soldiers. Controls still the best armed and funded private military organization in Russia. Is probably going to get Shoigu kicked out of office, and now he gets a country which is going to have nuclear weapons. I think if you're getting Prigozhin, you've won this round.
And if we can go back to earlier this space when we were having this discussion, when it was blatantly, once there was agreement that something was going on, that this was an armed rebellion across the board, the conversation centered on two things. It was, and I don't remember if it was Kim.com, David E, or somebody, I just don't remember, but one of the comments was, this is Shoigu who demonstrated his military genius after defeating the Ukrainian counteroffensive versus Prigozhin, who has no military experience or whatever, and somehow it is ludicrous and ridiculous that Prigozhin has any chance to go to Moscow and defeat the Russian military. And the only way they stopped Prigozhin from going to Moscow was not through military might. It was literally giving in to every single demand that Prigozhin had at the beginning. Because the first time Prigozhin threatened Putin was after Putin's speech national, where he said these guys are traitors, they stabbed the back of the Russian people, and we're going to go after them. That is the only time Prigozhin said, "You made a mistake, I'm going after you." And then they stopped.
He also said there's going to be a new president, right? He said, we're going to have a new president now that Putin has betrayed me and betrayed the soldiers, we're going to have a new president. And then Putin immediately gave him everything he wanted, plus a country. You got to say Prigozhin here in his first 24 hours is pulling an absolute masterstroke.
And let's not forget where Prigozhin was after Bakhmut. He pulled Russian Wagner forces out. He admits he suffered significant amount of casualties because of trying to seize Bakhmut. That's the whole reason why he was arguing. It's interesting we're getting reporting from CNN saying that his claims of running low on ammunition was blatantly a lie, and he used that as a cover to amass his own weapons. But even after suffering significant amount of casualties in Bakhmut, Wagner was able to seize Rostov-on-Don unopposed. And nobody for a second is going to stop.
Also, can I ask you a question? You know about these helicopters being shot down and these 12 casualties? What's the evidence for it? Because I'm reading the opposite, and it's apparently like
because it comes from fighter bomber.
Disinformation. That it's just fake news.
Fighter bomber is a Russian Air Force Telegram channel who has been an absolute one of the most credible sources in regards to Russian Air Force activities in Ukraine, and they are 100% pro-Russian. And aircraft getting shot down and casualties of that nature, it is credible. He is claiming that 12 Russian pilots were killed. Regardless, we have the footage of the destroyed helicopters. Like they're gone.
I mean, not all of them. Like the first one, I remember we saw a footage of like someone shooting in the sky, but then we never saw a helicopter. And we never saw the remnants. I'm not denying that it's not. I'm not denying it's the case for all 7, but let's not be clear. Like we haven't got the evidence for all 7. If you know what I mean.
I just saying that the one of the main trustworthy sources on that has communication, and even regardless, even if it's less, the one of the things that is undisputable. We have at least the footage of the wreckage of a Ka-52 that was destroyed. That is a modern Russian helicopter, right? That is a modern one. They don't have an unlimited amount of that. Unlike the Mi-35, the Ka-52 is much more modern, not an unlimited source of that. And then more importantly, we have the actual video of the Il-22 getting shot from the sky and plummeting, right? And that is a communication center. That is a key Russian command and control system, right? That's not an easy loss for the Russian military and for the Russian Air Force. And so again, we're forgetting that the only thing that stopped Prigozhin from reaching to Moscow is basically, from all the agreements we're getting right now and the sources that are coming out from Russia, is that Prigozhin's demands were completely met. Every single one of them. There was no attempt by Putin to say, I dictate the terms of how this goes. Why would if the coup was to happen, if a coup was to happen, let's say this was a plan by Putin all along, he would have utilized his speech to basically say, I'm listening to Prigozhin, the heroes of Bakhmut, Wagner and their heroes in Bakhmut. They have brought me devastating information and brought to my attention of the corruption of the Russian MOD. Shoigu has betrayed me. As such, I am acknowledging Wagner and I am acknowledging their demand. Shoigu will immediately be imprisoned and deported or killed or whatever. He didn't say that. He declared war. Putin declared war. So are we just going to completely ignore Putin's speech? Was that also a false flag or a conspiracy? I just don't understand. Let me shoot down Russian aircraft from the sky after the fact. And oh, by the way, we have more videos coming out of before this, when this ended, of Russian airstrikes against bridges and roads to try to disrupt Wagner's advances to Moscow.
Did we read this latest news from Peskov? So he said, and I'll just, if it's been repeated, it's fine because we might have had new listeners in the last 5-10 minutes. But he says criminal charges against Wagner boss Prigozhin will be dropped, and he will be sent to neighboring Belarus, according to Kremlin spokesperson Peskov.
Yeah. We shared that.
Yeah, so yeah. Oh, you just said, sorry. Yeah, so
No,
it means, yeah.
To add to that, the Kremlin, this is a bit, it gives me a bit of a chilling feeling, but they've added further to the statement earlier that we read out, the guarantee that Prigozhin will be able to leave for Belarus is the word of the president of Russia. So Putin's guaranteeing that he will be able to leave for Belarus. I'm interpreting that as he will be alive to be able to go to Belarus, I guess.
Yeah, Chief, I know you've got some thoughts on this. Go ahead.
Well, the thing, a couple of quick points, when we heard about this entire, I guess, internal conflict between Wagner and Russia, a lot of it was, kind of information we got at the moment. We weren't really sure about things, but what we can look at right now is that within like about 24 hours, this whole I'll call it an armed rebellion. I wouldn't go on to say it's a coup, but this whole thing has been pretty much resolved. The question really now is with Wagner and how they are going to be a presence in Ukraine. I know they got, from what I'm hearing, some sort of deal to go back to Africa and go into resources there. So I'm not sure if they're going to be, leaving Russia or not, and how Russia will be attacking Ukraine, because Wagner has always had the belief that the Russians weren't doing enough to go after Ukraine. They thought they were playing with it, almost not really going at it the entire way, but calling it a military operation, which is, I guess, I'm believing that it's more so to keep infrastructure in place within Ukraine when they reclaim the territory. But we're going to see the more interesting question, of course, is going to be how Russia attacks Ukraine. Are they going to go and really accelerate their attacks and really advance it?
Chief, that's a good point. Let me ask that. Tom, thanks for joining us, and specifically, I'd like to hear your overall thoughts about that. But also, do we think that there's going to be, in order to basically make himself look strong because of what's happened for the world, no matter how you look at it, there's going to be a large proportion of people who see this as a move that has weakened him. Do you think that he's now going to be more aggressive in his attacks against Russia to be A, to make people forget about what happened, and B, to try and basically become a more offensive in the war? Tom?
I would think so. It makes sense that would be the outcome here. The question is, what was Prigozhin trying to accomplish? And I'm not sure that I think any of us have a real good understanding of what's going on here. There's too many layers to this. I've been sitting here this entire time wondering how much did the CIA and the MI6 pay him to do this? And that's been the thing that's been going through my head for the last 4 to 6 hours as I've gone through this. But this, if he gets what he wants,
I'm going to let you carry on as well. So do you think that there was some Western influence in the moves that he made? And if there was, wouldn't he have tried to commit more bloodshed? Because as soon as people start seeing death, that's when things escalate. So and the fact that it never escalated to that level, do you really think that it was the West that was involved?
It's funny. Like there's a multiple ways of looking at it, right? And one of them is what I just said, right? and he played his hand and he overplayed it. He didn't get the support that he thought he might have thought he had within the Russian military or within the Russian hardliners, and it just fizzled. And then now it's a matter of Putin, and Putin always does this. This is one of the things that just popped into my head as we were talking about this, because as I popped in, the person who was speaking said, why would we ignore Putin's speech, right, where he declares war on Wagner for what they did? Well, Putin is never one to overreact and want to throw away an asset in any way, manner, shape, or form. You see this all through Syria. You see it with his the way he handled Erdogan and the shoot down of the Su-24 7 years ago. Like he always turns if he can, what is a liability back into an asset. And that's just my read on him. So it could be far worse than what than I'm portraying here, because I don't know. I'm just speculating. This is all just back of the envelope kind of schizo posting, for lack of a better term. But the fact that they're going to take all these guys and throw them put them in Belarus, and as far as I'm concerned, their punishment would be, well, you guys get to be the front line. Prove your loyalty to the fatherland. You get to be the first ones to die if Poland crosses the border in 3 weeks. Because the way I'm reading all this, guys, I don't know about anybody else, but to me, everything looks like they're pushing towards declaring World War III at the NATO summit in 3 weeks. That's what it looks like to me. Everything looks like this. We got Newland in Copenhagen. We've got and Sullivan in Copenhagen dressing everybody down. We've got Ben Wallace being put forth as
so let
NATO
me Tom,
NATO
let me go
General
to
Secretary and all this stuff. It's crazy.
yeah. So let me just go to Live and ask him the same question. So
Sure.
Live, same question to you, and from a different angle. Like now, let's say Prigozhin, as the per the report say, he's in Belarus. What does Russia do next? What does Putin do next? What's the next move? Live.
As Tom was talking, I mean, it could, to take it to another conspiratorial level, not really conspiratorial, but Lukashenko's always been ill. I mean, Prigozhin might be groomed to take over for Lukashenko in the coming years. But to declare war on NATO, Russia and Wagner are absolutely in no position to take on NATO.
That's not what I said. What I meant, Live, was that NATO is getting ready to openly become part of the war, that they're getting ready to openly move into the conflict around the NATO summit.
I see.
That's what I meant. That's what I was getting at.
That I agree with. I could see them doing that. I think it would be a grave mistake if they did that, but I could
agree,
see them doing
that. But it's clear that's what's going on here, and there's an air of desperation to all of the coverage that we've seen from the West going forward here. Look, I look at what they did when they blew up the dam, and then they blew up the ammonia pipeline right after each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like when the Russians pulled out of the grain deal, and then they blew it up. And again, everything, like all the attacks around Belgorod are all about, that's all in the same area where all the Russian oil and gas enters Ukraine. It's all in that area. Mm-hmm. So there's a very strategic moving parts to all of the moves that are being made. So to me, it just looks like this is just the next phase of the escalation. They're trying, as always, to get Putin to go offside and to get him angry.
I would agree. I mean, Putin's best chance right now to combat the West is to hit them economically and create another wave of inflation via economic means: grain, oil, fertilizer, you name it. That's his only chance to stave off the West for the next couple of years.
I'll say real quick. With the
Please, 1 second. I want to ask Clive a real quick question, which I think a lot of people would want to know. So it's an interesting perspective you just said, Live, that Putin doesn't have an anham to take on NATO. When you look at what's happened over the last year in terms of this conflict, would you not say that's exactly what's happened? He has taken on NATO, not because of a choice, but because that's the circumstances that presented themselves.
Well, NATO hasn't really engaged in this war, to be honest. I mean, they've sent over some shells of arms that they've had and some overstock and whatnot. But to take on NATO, I mean, that's significant. I mean, Russia has no chance to actually attack any kind of NATO nation. They don't have the money to do such a thing, and they don't have the professional army. If they can't take Kiev, that's land on the land border, what chance would they ever have going to Warsaw?
But do you believe that Russia is going 100% all out on their operation into Kiev?
No, they don't have the military to take urban centers. They'd have significant losses. To take the city like Kiev, you would need 100 to 200,000 troops on top of 4 times the amount of the support and supply. It's just impossible for them.
I think though it's like the way that they're doing a special operation, like I think that with Wagner, they were saying they wanted more aggression from Russia. I do think that Russia has been holding back a little bit. But in terms of the Western media, what someone has raised a point before, the West has a very clear, at least the media has a bias, I guess, against Russia in that sense. And usually most of the Western media will kind of follow on through and push a narrative that kind of aligns with Western ideologies, especially when it goes to Russia or even China or any of the other nations in the other pole. But in reality, I mean, this whole conflict, I think the main issue we should be looking for again is going to be how we see an escalation in Ukraine, and if Wagner. I'm not sure if anyone knows this or the details about this, but is Wagner going to be withdrawing from Ukraine? I've heard that some people have said that they're going to be going more to Africa, but I've heard people say they're going to stay in Ukraine in their current posts. I don't know if anyone had any answer to that.
Well, Chief, there's one thing that I think is worth mentioning, which we talked about earlier in the space before we were here, which is that Wagner Group has basically come out and said that the entire raison d'etre for the invasion of Ukraine was made up by the Russian MOD in order to enrich its oligarchs, and that the invasion of Ukraine, the premises of the invasion of Ukraine, including Nazism and Ukrainian aggression, were false. And Prigozhin himself has criticized Shoigu for this and saying that it was entirely unnecessary to invade Ukraine and that his men were butchered unnecessarily. And he's come out strongly, and this is one of the primary reasons for his desire to remove the leadership of the Russian MOD. So this is an entirely different narrative, within Russia that we haven't quite seen before. And Wagner Group has basically come out, and now we're seeing Russian military bloggers praising Wagner Group for this desire to remove these corrupt leaders in Russia. So what does that mean for the Russian MOD? We don't know yet, but that's certainly a different narrative that we haven't heard yet coming out of Russia itself. And I think hearing from Tom, it's like I guess I understand, and if I'm wrong, Tom, please correct me. That is it your belief that Prigozhin himself is a CIA asset and that this is a CIA plot, or is that me misunderstanding what you were saying?
Tom's not on the space at the moment. We'll try and get him back up. But yeah, Mickey. In terms of, let me go to Patrick. Patrick, so from just shifting this conversation slightly back to the Ukraine-Russia war, how does this impact the war from a very immediate perspective and then maybe from a medium-term perspective? Patrick. Okay, seems Patrick's not on, so let me go to Mickey. Mickey, what's your thoughts about that? Or Dr. Snecko, one of you two.
Go ahead, Snecko. I've been talking a lot.
All right, go ahead, Mickey.
Sorry.
Hey, sorry. What was the question? Sorry, I was actually.
Yeah, no worries. So we know, this specific move to shift into the Ukraine-Russia war. What impact does this have on the war, both from and Putin's perspective and the way he's going to deal with the war now, from a immediate perspective and then from a medium-term perspective?
Okay, so in immediate perspective, the loss of those EW platforms, that does hurt because, again, those are a pretty limited resource. But I think Russia does have enough spares. I mean, I think Russia started the war with about 20 of those Mi-8 EW helicopters. The communications platform, I'm not quite sure of. But there will be a few days of supply disruption because the roads were blockaded, right? And Rostov-on-Don was one of the places where a lot of the supplies going into the southern front. So you can expect a few days of supply disruption from that. Medium term, I would say that essentially they will hopefully Russia finds that the PMC model is not something that is reliable, and there might be more of an attempt. There might be more of an attempt to. There might be more of an attempt to actually mobilize. I mean, this is something that's been floating in the background. There have been preparations for mobilization, like laws and streamlining the process. But so far, we've not gotten a word on a second mobilization. And we had the first mobilization last year, and yeah, and the question is this going to be the catalyst for saying, okay, we can't trust this formation? They're going to absorb some of the Wagners are going to sign contracts with MOD. They did say like the ones who didn't participate in the coup are open to sign contracts with MOD. They'd be distributed to other units.
Nico, you have to keep in mind as well, if Prigozhin is correct in what he said, and this is just his own words, he said that the casualties and the diminishment and the destruction of the Russian army is many, many, many times higher than reported by the Russian.
He is not right on that at all. I mean, Media Zona, the way he gave nonsensical figures for Bakhmut. Like he said, he had 30,000 mercenaries and 10,000 of them died. That would be a 100% casualty rate. Then he said he had 50,000 prisoners and 10,000 died. So he took more casualties with his long-term mercenaries than with his people. Like Media Zona, which is a pro-Western source, is not in favor of Russia at all, could only find about 1,000 like Wagner mercs and about 4,000 prisoners dead. So the scale of fighting, I've advised people from the beginning, the scale of fighting you're seeing in Ukraine is much smaller than what people are thinking. People see these numbers like, oh, they're going to mobilize 300,000, they're going to mobilize 1 million people, but at the front you're only seeing like 4 or 5 brigades fighting at a time, and they don't really inflict the kind of casualties that you would need to like get 20,000 dead and like another 30,000, 50,000 wounded.
Well, why would Prigozhin then come out against Putin and try to discredit his military so strongly, so publicly for so many months, unless there was something?
Because I think there was a deeper sort of factional fight that had more to do with like long-term.
So, guys, sorry, Dr. Sneko, just some breaking news, and then I'll pass it straight back to you. I'm unsure about what the source is for this, so I'll need to verify the source. But initially, it says it's from the Kremlin. It says changes in the leadership of the Russian Ministry of Defense were not discussed during the negotiations with Prigozhin. But again, that needs to be verified. It just says from the Kremlin, but I'll find out what the source is. Right. Sorry, continue, Dr. Sneko.
Right. I mean, the thing with Wagner and the MOD, they've had like a contentious relationship before the SMO. So this actually happened in Syria. Like, they got a very nice contract for the first year, but then the MOD took their toys away for the second year, and they went freelancing. They got hit by a USAF airstrike. Like, there is like a history of kind of bad blood. And what he's saying, like his exaggerations, deliberate manipulations, are in part too like an attempt to discredit the MOD because he has a beef running with them that goes beyond the fighting in Ukraine. So, like, I would take everything that he says with a giant, rock of salt.
Would you say that now, given this like long-standing beef between Wagner and the Russian MOD, like you were talking about in Syria and in Ukraine and in Bakhmut, would you say that if Shoigu does leave office, and would you say that Prigozhin is the big winner of that fight? And has he basically won that battle now? If he's been able to, remove his opponents from office, gain territory for himself, find complete asylum for his soldiers, is he now the big winner?
He would be a winner, yes. But at that breaking news then brings into question, right? Were MOD changes discussed or not, or was this Prigozhin just looking for a safe way out? Right,
and that's my question. So if there's kind of two scenarios, really, right? It's like MOD leadership stays or it goes. If it stays, then you still have this continued power struggle. But now you have Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is now basically the de facto leader of Belarus, which also is supposed to get nuclear weapons.
No, he's not going to be de facto leader of Belarus. He's not going to be de facto leader of Belarus. Lukashenko is a very powerful politician, and he knows how to control these elements.
Like, if you were Lukashenko, would you be really happy about 25,000 well-trained armed soldiers?
No. That's not the issue.
In your territory?
Look, that's the numbers are complete bullshit, because the core of Wagner is actually very small, like 4,000 or 5,000 guys, And over the course of the Ukraine conflict, they actually absorbed they actually cycled through about 30,000 prisoners. And the thing about these prisoners, they're on 6-month contracts. So they come in and they leave. There's high turnover. So their numbers overall never really exceeded 10, 12,000 in this entire fight.
Wait, hold on a second. So you tell me that Vladimir Putin decided to basically negotiate with 3,000 guys who shot down 7 attack helicopters,
Yeah, I mean,
a
they're coming
airplane,
in with,
and that
you
was it?
saw the kind of equipment to bring in.
There's only 3,000 Wagner troops
I'm
who were able to take
telling you,
Rostov and go
this
to
is
Moscow.
the core of Wagner. The core of Wagner is between 4,000 and 5,000 guys, the long-term employees. These are the ones that organize into these. What?
You're telling me that 4,000 people were able to basically force Vladimir Putin to negotiate? That makes absolutely no sense. They had tanks,
I mean,
helicopters.
Again, yes, because you look at what's happening. Okay, they were coming into Russia mixed in with civilian traffic. So the reason why some of these helicopters are getting shot down is because they have to come in close to do IFF. And the thing is, and then they're being shot down by close range air defense systems.
I have a quick update. Prigozhin has seen, I've got a video, I'm looking at it, leaving Rostov. He actually stalls his car a little bit and he shakes hands with the people of Rostov. People go up to him, they're shaking his hand. He shakes their hand before parting. So he's actually leaving Rostov as we speak. And this came in 2 minutes ago.
Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Dave.
So no, the thing is, and you look at the way that they were armed, inside Russia, because a lot of the army had been cleaned out, equipment sent to Ukraine, you didn't really see a lot of heavy equipment, and you saw a lot of Rosguardia, National Guard infantry, but then you have these Wagner convoys are mixed in with civilian traffic, and how the hell do you even fight that? And this goes back to the way that, I guess, Putin does not want to create a major panic or disturbance. So because he didn't want to potentially involve civilian collateral damage with civilian traffic. Basically, he just kind of called the thing off, and they just found a way. Okay, you go to exile. We're not going to discuss anything else, and effectively you're semi-exiled in Belarus. I mean, that's the kind of classic, frozen conflict Putin type, kick the can down the road solution. Now, what I want to ground everybody on is the numbers in Ukraine, the numbers of units that are fighting, the number of men that are fighting is actually at the front is actually much smaller than people imagine. Wagner itself, core is 4,000 or 5,000 people. They may add on another 10,000 or so prisoners and mobilized conscripts from the LDNR. But these are not going to be available because their contracts expire, and only the core Wagner is what Prigozhin is interested in. But then here's the other thing: now, how many of these people participate in the coup? Right, the ones that participate in the coup, they're no longer eligible to sign contracts with the MOD. So when you see Wagner go into Belarus, there might only be 3,000 guys. So something like that, Lukashenko can control them. Lukashenko's not going to fight.
Sorry, 1 second. Just some breaking news. So it says, this is reported by CNN. It says the Kremlin says that the Wagner fighters will return to the base and sign a contract with the military. So it seems like there is a possibility they could be incorporated into the actual military. So that's been reported by CNN. But let me just sorry, go ahead.
So basically, what's going to happen is Wagner's going to get chopped down from this division-sized formation to maybe just a few thousand guys sitting on the Polish border. And that's not really a threat to Lukashenko. Lukashenko is a serious politician. He knows how to handle internal security. So, and for a country like Belarus, 2,000-3,000 guys, they can handle it. They're not going to be a major internal threat, and Prigozhin is not going to be the president of Belarus. So, in this sense, in this way, Russia did diffuse the threat of Wagner to some extent, but the problem is Prigozhin did establish the precedent where he can just kind of flout the law and just shoot up run amok, shoot up a bunch of shit, and then get a deal to go in semi-exile and get charges dropped, and then he has some influence within the military, within society itself, to which he can actually potentially leverage his influence in future Russian politics or elections. I just don't think this is the end of it. Like, this is medium term, long term. Like, you might even see more PMCs, more oligarchs try to start up their own influence by arming themselves. I mean, this is really opening up a can of worms that you may not want to open up.
Well, okay, so let me just go to Jessica. Jessica, thanks for joining us. You were on earlier. Since you left and you've come back, the coup has ended. Wagner forces are retreating. I'd love to hear your thoughts initially on that, and also what do you think the ramifications of that are?
Sure, thanks. Glad to be back. First things first. Over is not over. As we know, deals in Russia, deals with the Russian government are made to be broken. This is a huge development, but it's certainly not a final development on two fronts. Firstly, Prigozhin knows very well, whether he's in Russia, whether he's in Belarus, whether he's somewhere in the Sahel, he's a dead man walking unless he comes out of this a winner. He had all the leverage today, and he won't have given it up for nothing. He's playing a long game. And secondly, for Putin, he has been severely weakened by the day's events. The country saw him afraid, saw him weakened, saw him out of control. And the entire thesis of his power is, I am the strong man who protects you, who protects Russia from Russia's enemies, who are primarily without, who are NATO, who are Ukraine, who are the gay Nazis, Lord knows. But now Russia and the world have seen the greatest threat to Russia is from within, is Russia itself. So his power has been undermined, not only in the eyes of his allies in the Kremlin, in the military, but above all in the eyes of the people as well. You can't just paper over this by saying there's been a deal and Prigozhin is going to Minsk and his troops are joining now the regular armed forces. So this is far from over.
Jessica, can I ask you a question?
Go ahead.
What are your thoughts on sort of Prigozhin's earlier statements, basically saying that the raison d'être for the invasion of Ukraine from Russia were essentially made up, that it was entirely designed to enrich a few oligarchs, Shoigu included, that the story about Nazism is not real, that the story about Ukrainian aggression is not real? Like, what do you think the impact of that is, and why do you think he came out and said
Mickey,
that?
and Jessica, I just wanted to share it. We have our first images of Prigozhin leaving Rostov currently right now. I just posted. I will share it in the group chat so you guys can post it if you want for Mario's.
Thanks. Yeah, to the previous question, this ties in precisely with what I was saying. You can't put that cat is out of the bag and you can't stuff it back in. He's called out the leadership in no uncertain terms, and he's been doing that for weeks. But this has been clearer than ever, and they won't be able to just walk those accusations back. Prigozhin has gone from Ukraine to Moscow Oblast to Minsk within 24 hours. So Lord knows what can happen in the next week. It's going to be a very eventful time, and we need to keep just watching closely. And just like with watching developments in the counteroffensive, don't react to them minute by minute and say, this is now the new state of affairs. This is now the lay of the land. Things follow the trends. So this is a huge development, but it's certainly not over.
What do you think happens with Shoigu? I mean, like, do you think he goes down without a fight? Do you think he stays in office? Like, what's like? No one's really talking about him, but he's sort of the primary target of Prigozhin's, sort of escalation.
Yeah, I think his days are numbered. Let's remember that Prigozhin was completely against the notion of Wagner forces being folded into the regular army, and now that's what's happening. They offered contracts to anyone who wasn't involved, and amnesty basically for any of the soldiers who were involved today. Having Wagner soldiers signing Russian military contracts is a concession at first glance, but he will not have made that concession unless he gets something that he wants in return. And I would not be surprised if Shoigu's proverbial head is one of them. He would then look like he came out of this with nothing. And he really held the cards in his hand today. He was the one making Moscow dance and not the other way around. So he won't have made that concession for nothing. Also, for Putin himself, he will be looking for fall guys, and they will need to be very high ranking because this was a very high level, high profile fuck up. So Shoigu, in my mind, is a very obvious target from both Prigozhin and Putin as someone who will have to go. But like I said, that would be my gut instinct, but nobody knows what's going to happen. I was only half joking earlier this evening to a Russian colleague. Let's see who's still alive in the morning.
Do you think this is the beginning of a multipolar? I guess if Prigozhin survives, we're talking about a sort of multipolar Russian military apparatus, right, where he gets to make some calls and some decisions. This is something that's never really happened before. Or do you think his days are number two? He's going to jump out of a hotel window, because everyone who's challenged Putin historically is dead. There's nobody who's challenged Putin politically and lived. So what do you think the chances are that we see Prigozhin's calling the shots, or do you think he's done as well?
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, his days are numbered unless he wins, and he knows it. So this is the question. What threats or offers have been made to paper this over? Or also the very possible alternative is that this quote unquote deal was made to be broken, and Prigozhin can turn around in 12 to 72 hours and say, oh, the deal is off, they betrayed me, they didn't do what they said they would, fuck these guys, and let's saddle up again. This is Russia. We're talking about your word, the written the verbal agreement, the written deal has very little actual holding power in this situation, and everyone knows that, the Russians themselves best of all. So I'm taking all of this with a grain of salt. Yeah, these are major developments, but it is not over yet.
I think
No,
that,
I think that.
so.
Go ahead, Chief. Go ahead.
Oh, I would say also, so we heard about this deal, and Russia was saying that there's no type of talk about demotions or anything like that, or leadership change. But looking at the outside, it's clear that there at least was. I think there must have been some sort of talk about the leadership, and you're right about there having a fall guy or something like that, some person who have to be blamed for this all. Regression though on the Wagner CEO. I'm not sure. I guess it would be immediate, or it'll be more of a long-term thing. Just because if they're trying to stop this whole convoy and this whole I guess armed rebellion against some leadership within Russia, I don't know if they have to want to go through this whole little song and dance all over again. And if they did, they might not even be able to control it. Like, who would step in if the Wagner CEO was gone, right? Which person would, and would this person in this void be more combative and a bit more a bit more aggressive with the MOD or not? So the void, people, we have leaders, you may not like them, but the void, you might find someone a bit worse that might fill it.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Even if Prigozhin's dead at some point in this story, Wagner remains, and those soldiers, those mercenaries, I should say, their weapons, their hardware, they're still there. So, who tries to take over that power? But let's also remember, saying that somebody worse than Prigozhin could come into the picture, or somebody worse than Putin could take power, we're comparing pretty rotten apples with pretty rotten oranges. It's being afraid that the demon will take over for the devil. So I'm not too concerned about that, because it doesn't change the calculus that much. All of these men have shown themselves more than willing to kill tens of thousands of people, to commit atrocious war crimes. So we're not talking about any real good options here. The question is how to prepare for and manage expectations and potential outcomes and potentialities. And the number one thing to focus on is and remains the war in Ukraine. How to leverage this moment. How do the Ukrainians and how do Ukraine's allies leverage this moment to weaken Russia further on the battlefield? These past 24 hours have shown that the greatest threat to Russian power is Russia itself. So how can that be leveraged? What can the Ukrainians do to keep the ball, to build momentum in their counteroffensive? And who takes the reins at Wagner or in the Kremlin at some point, if and when some of these heads have rolled, are eventualities that we'll simply have to deal with when they come. Because no one can predict it. No one in the Kremlin knows what's going to happen. So certainly those of us out here also don't know.
Jesse,
I also will
real
quick though. I did hear there were people within Ukraine who tried to take advantage of the situation. We had some people talking to the Independent saying that they would use the situation to their advantage, and there was, I believe, a conflict with Ukraine and Russian forces over some bridge. I'm not sure which one. I'll look in the intel channel that said that, but there was a conflict.
So no, they crossed the Dnipro River, but this wasn't.
Sorry,
Okay,
I'm news. Ukrainian strikes on Russian positions in Bakhmut, and I'm looking at the video. War Monitors just posted it.
So what I was going to say, Chief, is that there was reports of a crossing the Dnipro River. It doesn't look like, I think the Russians, the last I saw was like 3 tanks. This wasn't a massive push. For the most part, besides Bakhmut, with some advances there wasn't any mass Ukrainian push to alter the situation on the ground with anything that occurred in Russia in the last 12 to 24 hours.
Yeah, and a massive push is also not going to, the Ukrainians aren't going to be so foolish and rash as to make a major push within 12 hours just because of the chaos internally in Russia. But what it does mean, again, not looking at the minute to minute, but looking at the trends and looking at the medium term, the Ukrainians have, from the beginning of this counteroffensive, we're still in the initial phases, let's remember, is to push Russian lines and look for and feel out and tease out weaknesses in their defenses. And when they find weaknesses, they will push and exploit them with more armor and with more men. Now, this has been the plan from the beginning, but what this chaos in Russia means is that there will be further weaknesses in the defenses, or those that already exist will probably be exacerbated. Why? Beyond the obvious issue of morale and the fighting spirit of the troops that is already notoriously weak, being even more damaged by this chaos. Also, simply chain of command and lines of communication and trust between command centers, whether command centers behind the front line to the guys in the trenches, to the guys on the front, as well as command coming from Moscow to the command centers closer to the front. There's going to be huge levels of mistrust, miscommunication. They will be fucking up more than ever in the aftermath of this chaos. And that is good news for the Ukrainian counteroffensive as they are probing for weaknesses. So it would have been rash and irresponsible, frankly, for them to go all out, blitzing around today just on the basis of 12 to 24 hours of chaos. But let's look over these next couple of weeks what kinds of new weaknesses can be exploited. Also, I'd be very curious to hear numbers on how many Russian soldiers have been surrendering in the past 12 to 24 hours and how that trend looks over the coming days.
No, Jessica, that's that. So I think because it doesn't really necessarily talk about. I don't think we got any report on from the Ukrainian side of how many Russians surrendered to Ukraine, but to Wagner, which you bring up an excellent point. Does the amnesty for Wagner, which then I also saw the comment that Wagner will then sign contracts with the Russian MOD. Does that mean that they're now under the MOD, or are they now some sort of separate legal entity? But I guess we got to wait for that. But Wagner claimed at a minimum 180 soldiers surrendered and switched sides to Wagner during this push to Moscow and Rostamov when they seized it. What happened to those soldiers? Are they considered now deserters? Would they be considered part of Wagner? Do they like that? That is a huge gray area that really has not been addressed in any way, shape, or form, because there were soldiers that switched to the Wagner side. No questions about that.
Absolutely. And even more soldiers who simply stepped out of the way and did nothing. So it's a very, very excellent point. And those soldiers will be in a gray space and be watching their backs. These guys are going to be terrified that they're going to get fragged. And likewise, for the Wagner soldiers, they're going to be pretty pissed. They went in guns blazing today. I doubt very much that they were expecting to get within 200 kilometers of downtown Moscow and then be told to pull back. If Prigozhin is a dead man walking now, his soldiers, his men are also feeling the same way. And saying that they've been signed on to the MOD does not make them sleep any easier at night. It is very, very easy in the Russian military to be killed by friendly fire. So these guys will have a grudge. They'll be pissed both at Prigozhin and at the MOD. It's really not good for unit cohesion, to put it very mildly.
What are your thoughts on, Jessica? Like just on this, like you're saying this disruption in the power structure of the Russian MOD and its impacts on the war in Ukraine. You know, the soldiers on the line being confused. But what do you think? You know, Russia's primary allies are thinking at this moment. Like, what do you think Beijing is on the phone talking to? I'm sure they're on the phone with the Kremlin right now. What questions are you think they're asking? How do you think they're feeling? This is not something they would have predicted. Like, what do you think is the calculus in Beijing at the moment?
Yeah, Xi Jinping was very quiet today. I had a couple good chuckles about that. They have been watching very closely, and this has been a real warning to them that wars can have unexpected, unintended consequences. China's number one interest in this. I mean, obviously they're on Russia's side. They have been from the beginning, even in those months when they were being quite quiet on the international stage. They want as much of a status quo as possible for their energy and economic interests. They don't care about Putin. They don't care about Prigozhin. They care about stability in their trade relations and their energy relations with Moscow, full stop. And so any threat of complete chaos in Moscow and unclear command and who's in power and who's controlling what assets and who's controlling market access. This is what they do not want to see, and so their message to Moscow will be, fix this, get this under control. And the tacit threat there will be, if you can't get this under control, we will not have a problem backing up someone who comes to the table and says, I will take the reins in the Kremlin, and don't worry, your interests, China's interests in Russia, will be protected. That's all Xi Jinping wants to hear. They're in it for themselves. They don't give a shit about Putin. So this is a bad day for Xi and his plans for Taiwan. It doesn't necessarily change the calculus, but it's a warning. It's a reminder that wars can blow up in your face in unexpected ways. And also, quite frankly, to Russia's allies, whether they've been direct or tacit and passive allies across Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, this will have been also a very sobering day and a very clear reminder that Russian power is not what it seems to be. This is not the Soviet Union. The Russian Federation does not have its shit together.
I mean, like Prigozhin is not the only crazy army in Russia. So what are they? If you have an army, a private army in Russia, there's many of them. What are they thinking now that they see Prigozhin able to do this?
Oh yeah, we can expect even more PMCs to be popping up like mushrooms. Whoever has the money to finance one, at the very least, they will be looking to protect themselves and their assets, even if not necessarily to engage in a war. And they'll be wanting to have enough assets, enough military assets, to be able to be of use to any potential parties in a future conflict like this. You know, this has created more. This deal, quote unquote, is not going to reassure anyone that now peace and tranquility has returned to Moscow. On the contrary, I think this is just the beginning of a prolonged power struggle. I mean, these are the cracks in the dam, and it's just beginning. So this purported deal, we'll know more in the coming days of what shape it took and who was involved and if it actually holds water. Like I said, let's see who's alive in the morning. But I think we can expect more instability in Moscow after this and not less.
An important point is I just heard the back end of what you were both talking about. I'm sure Pestov in the breaking news earlier said that even those who are in the Wagner group will be now incorporated into the military. So it seems like that's going to be the plan, but let's see how that works out. I mean, what's your thoughts on that, Jessica?
I don't think those soldiers are going to be very, very pleased about that. And they are going to be walking around with targets on their backs. And they are going to be sticking together and watching out for each other. I think it's a very dangerous, explosive situation. I mean, we already had lots of cases of skirmishes and quote unquote unfriendly friendly fire between regular army and Wagner in Ukraine. And even if Wagner has now been folded into MOD forces, well, great. Now it'll just be infighting from within the units themselves. It's a very dangerous situation for both the Wagner soldiers who are now being folded in and for the regular army that they'll be serving side by side with. And also, let's see how many actually stay. You know, I would imagine that a number of these guys will be deserting. They're not happy, like I mentioned before. This is not how they saw the day ending. This is certainly not what they were promised in whatever pep talk they were given before they marched on Moscow.
Just a quick update, and just jumping in very quickly before we go to Berna. Apparently, 3,000 elite Chechen troops had taken up positions in Moscow to defend the Russian capital today from the Wagner Group, should it have been necessary. So 3,000 elite Chechen troops. And I just want to say, I'm listening to you, Jessica, and I agree with your points, but I find it really baffling that and this space has been running for what, 23, 24 hours almost. And pretty much one thing that everybody across the board has agreed on is the perspective you've given in terms of the future safety of these people who took part in it, the guarantees they've been given. Is it really, really a guarantee? Sorry, I think your mic's open. I think, Chief, your mic's open. So here's the thing. If we sat abroad who are not involved at all in any sort of, on a personal level on the ground in Russian politics, know this, that they were playing with fire, because now that it seems to be over, for now at least, their future could be uncertain. Surely they must have known that. They must have known that. They have Putin as a leader. They know the history. They're born and bred there. They know their politics. But before we answer that, Suleiman, I'll pass back to you, because I think, thanks for the update.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. Jessica, another question I got before I move on to a couple of the other panelists to ask them some questions as well. But another way of looking at this is you had Prigozhin, who he basically did a coup, an attempted coup, but at the same time, this was a prime time for people within the government to turn on Putin. It would have been a good point to take him out, and yet they all stood firm. From another perspective, is it not the case that, or can one not argue that it showed that he's got loyalty amongst those who are basically his subordinates?
Yeah, an excellent question. And I think it's not a black and white answer. Yes, there are definitely people and factions loyal to Putin. And of course, they were backing him today, and Kadyrov is just one example. But also, Prigozhin would not have been able to pull this if he didn't have backing as well. I don't think it was likely to see people turn on Putin in the space of 12 to 24 hours. This wasn't going to be an off with his head moment. But the fact is, he was deeply damaged by what happened today. Deeply, perhaps fatally in the long term. And his allies know that, as do his enemies. And like I said, Prigozhin did not pull this without knowing that he'd have some backing in the Kremlin, in the FSB for what he did. And backing in this case doesn't necessarily mean folks who are going to come out guns blazing and back him up in the streets. In this case, simply by not acting, by not acting out against him, by staying silent and watching events unfold, that indirectly helped him. And Putin looked very vulnerable today and very weak. So it's not over yet. This is not something that's going to be resolved tonight. But I think rather
And social
media has made things much worse in terms of people really easily forget history. They you know, there's a thing that's part of it before they crash the core television. And I think what happens in these events is we get a lot of analysts and everybody's got television. I take a step back and look at history and I tend to look at different things and I have a completely different viewpoint. I listen to this space for hours and hours about working. And, you know, the people are frantically trying to read teams when in actual fact the whole dynamic is much more simpler. And the threat to the Russian state was never really there. I mean, just honestly, people, I heard earlier military analysts saying that the small force of Wagner was going to roll up the highway and take Moscow. I mean, honest to God. You know, I thought you wouldn't even get to Moscow. How can you even get to Moscow? The distance is too big.
Many elements of Wagner presence in Belarus.
I wouldn't make this far-fetched conclusions at the moment, and I would also note that a couple of years ago, in 2020, Lukashenko was accusing that Wagner Group was actually plotting a coup, or Russia was planning a color revolution in Belarus. So, like, this type of rhetoric, this could really change. But I would say that now, as there are some sort of like fighters groups in Ukraine, like the Belarusian fighters, the Kalinovsky regiment in Ukraine, and they were making an announcement that they are sort of planning to march into Belarusian territory and overthrow the regime. And also knowing that Belarusian army is not really prepared for offensive operations. They lack the capabilities, the training, whatever. So they have been, like, the Belarusian regime has been nervous. So, like, what happens if there are some, like, I don't know, like the Kalinovsky fighters, the Belarusian fighters from Ukraine, what if there is some inner resistance, like sort of trying to unite and to overthrow the regime. And that in that case, having some reinforcement from, let's say, like the Wagner Group, that would play at hand of the regime.
So, Walter, I mean, the same question to you. What's your thoughts on the coup in terms of how it happened and then the final ramifications of it?
Hi everyone. Well, obviously the first thought or the aftermath, after the aftermath, is that it's quite a bummer. The feeling is somewhat comparable probably to the feeling then when I guess both of you have when she's already in bed naked and she says that she's not in the mood. So that's how it ended, abruptly. On a serious note, I think that this opened a Pandora box for Russia specifically, because we are ending up in a situation when tomorrow there will be another Russian PMC, private military company, in their ragtag equipment and sweatshirts. They have multiple private military companies like Radut or others. It's not just Wagner. And they will announce their own march towards Moscow. And then Putin will be nowhere to be found, or he will flee, and regular Russian military, will not do a thing again, as we have seen today, because essentially they have no will, no sense of responsibility, no command structure, as we have seen today, and this command structure is nowhere there to make decisions effectively and efficiently. And this poses a question like, why are we so even apprehensive of the whole thing, of the whole entity? The other thing that I have seen today is the so-called Russian opposition, which is abroad, specifically Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who publicly announced that everyone should support Prigozhin. And again, this shows that there is no actual opposition in Russia either, because the so-called Russian Democrats, or essentially how they want to call themselves, Russian Democrats, they're essentially only eager to change their current Tsar in order to hold elections, and elections is the only thing that they're focused upon. And elections will be held with their next tyrant, which again, surprise, surprise, will fail repeatedly. And yet again, this Russian democratic opposition will safely continue to play their predetermined
Walter,
role
actually, can I
of
ask you a question
opposition.
though? Walter, if I
Sure.
want to ask you a question on that. So Prigozhin a couple days ago basically announced that, in summary, that Russia's invasion to Ukraine was a mistake. He heavily pushed back on all the Russian talking points of the justification for invading Ukraine. And so, from somebody, obviously from the Ukrainian side, and from your perspective there, who's done a lot of reporting on Ukraine in Elevated Ukrainian Voices, what would your response be to Prigozhin? This criticism that he leveled against Russia, and even some Telegram channels in Wagner, because of the failures that the Russian military had into defending Moscow, basically kind of saying, hey, we need to pull out of Ukraine if we want to seriously defend our country. How do you square that from where you're at in your perspective of Ukraine and Russia?
Well, for Ukrainians, it doesn't really matter, who wreaks havoc in Russia, whether it's Putin, Prigozhin, or someone else. It's just somewhat, as I said, a bummer that they underachieved, even though they tried. So the process doesn't really matter. The end result matters. So again, when we hear all our Western governments and decision makers, regarding crossing so-called red lines, today we have seen that essentially there are no red lines for Russia. The so-called terribly frightening Russian regime is nowhere to be found, and the only effective opposition to that is the armed forces of Ukraine. Just today, we all have seen that 6 Russian helicopters, 1 fixed-wing aircraft, again, it was a command and control aircraft, they all were downed, destroyed, pilots killed. That's regarding the bloodshed, and regarding quote-unquote no blood was spilled. There was blood spilled, and a lot of equipment lost. On top of that, there were regions of Russia essentially captured by this, Wagner, PMC, and Prigozhin, and they were rolling through without any resistance, unabated. And the question is, what happened? And the answer is nothing. There was no nuclear Armageddon. There were no rivers of blood that we should be very so much afraid of. And we are in a situation when tomorrow 15 missiles, ATACMS missiles, can be launched at Moscow. They will strike Kremlin. And the only outcome of the so-called crossing the red lines will be more of indiscernible mumbling of Putin. That's what happened. That's where the red lines are. They're non-existent. They're just imposed upon us by Russian propaganda. And we are being told not to poke the bear. God forbid, don't poke the Russian bear because, something will happen, and nothing happens. Today the bear was like rolled around in mud and nothing really happened. The
But
only thing that will happen.
Walter, one quick one. So we had people from the Ukrainian or connections to the Ukrainian government on here, and they said that they were afraid that a 20%. So there's a 20% probability that they were afraid that this could be a psyop, and so or a false flag, and so for that reason, Ukraine didn't become aggressive today, with concerns that basically it was a trap. So, despite what you're saying, is it not the case that even then Ukraine was afraid of what the ramifications of making moves today would have? And so it's not as easy as poking the bear, as what you're saying, because essentially what happened today was there was no, if you look at it in reality, there was no civil war. They walked through these areas with without being stopped. They got to outside Moscow without being stopped. So there was no conflict between them. I mean, what would have been worse was if there was actually some real conflict. Thoughts?
Well, there was a conflict. Again, as I said, there was military equipment lost, soldiers killed, and there was essentially a faction of Russians rolling around Russia.
I mean, when you say soldiers
unabated.
killed, Malta, I mean, we've had reports, it's possibly 12, and there was unverified. That's not a huge amount of lost soldiers compared to like the grand schemes of, like, for example, how many are dying in Bakhmut, how many people are dying in the meat grinder. Like, that was significant. So, I mean, it's any loss of life is horrendous, but when you're doing it from from the perspective of war, even 12, even if it was the case of being 12, we don't know if it is. I doubt it, maybe, but let's say if it is, that's not a huge amount. That's not a big loss as the way you're describing it.
Well, I would disagree, because even on the best day during Ukrainian deployment of air defenses close to Russian border, allegedly, only 4 or 5 Russian aircraft were shot down during the day. And that was the best day. Today, they lost, 6 or 7, together with the crews.
Allegedly, again, a lot of those are unverified. But anyway, continue.
Well, allegedly about the Ukrainian air defense system. Not allegedly about Russian losses today. Those were visually confirmed.
I think the general point, though, it's like with this conflict, we were told a lot by the West and and a lot of people pushing this whole theory. Even Zelensky was talking about Putin's scared and all of this. I think attributing all these things when you're an outsider looking in, it's a bit like jumping to conclusions. What I can tell from this is that, yeah, there were some I think people who died from this. I'm not going to say that's a lot. I don't think it was. Any loss of life is not good. However, I think that we compare it to the entire Ukraine conflict or operation, it's not really comparable. But I will say I have seen reports of different, I guess, Ukraine was talking about taking advantage of the situation in the media. And I've seen on Telegram and other intel channels that there were pushes by Ukraine in some regions that were stopped. So I think that they did try to push, at least in the Orkovo region, and I think there's one other one that was more a couple hours ago as well that there is footage of too. But I think this conflict was really overhyped. I don't think it was really a coup, more like an armed rebellion that could have become a coup had it progressed a lot longer. But it was an armed rebellion. That's why I would categorize it as. And I think there was a lot of hype about this when this is a lot of it theater, political theater, and just propaganda from all sides. And we should try to wait and discern fact from fiction and not jump to conclusions on on certain topics like
Right,
this.
we shouldn't, but there are things that we have seen with our own eyes, and we have seen so-called red lines in Russia shift indefinitely and being pushed indefinitely. It's a moving goalpost, and essentially we understand that there are no red lines. You can do whatever you do and you need to do, and there will be no essentially opposition, because Russians understand only force, and then when they are beaten and pushed back, they yield. That's what was shown today.
Well, I mean, with Putin's actions, though, I mean, when I think about it, is it's more about pragmatic. And while the Wagner CEO, if we're going by the assumption that he did this and this is not some sort of psyop or whatever, again, or anything like that, Putin at the end of the day is a leader of his country, of Russia, his people. And I think there was a general goal with Lukashenko, who said this too, trying to avoid any sort of civilian bloodshed and to reduce casualties as much as possible. And I think with the resolution we got today, at least for right now, we are seeing a stop to bloodshed, and we are seeing a halt within 24 hours.
So,
Now,
so
whether or
Chief,
not,
if
well,
I think one of the things though that you bring up, because and I like to ask this actually to you, Aaron. I know you just jumped in, but so we originally got the reports of, okay, the agreement was basically Shoigu and Gerasimov are out. Prigozhin gets immunity, goes to, and everybody in Wagner gets immunity. Wagner becomes a separate element of the MOD, not under the control of that. And then they're going to go to Belarus and Poland. But now, subsequently, what we're hearing from Russian media is not necessarily the case. We have heard absolutely no official statement of Gerasimov or Shoigu being removed. And if anything, then the other thing we're hearing is that Wagner will sign a contract with the MOD, which it's implied, that then they will be part of the MOD. So, Aaron, if it's confirmed, it's almost like a betrayal. Like Wagner Prigozhin's demands were not met. Did Putin actually do a one-up on Prigozhin and comes up on top, or does Wagner then go back to what we saw the last couple of hours?
So my thoughts are Wagner is really just they're doing this as a positional thing, right? Because it's kind of like they always want to be part, king. They always want to be on top of the Russian war machine, as seen as the most elite fighting force, right? That's the thing is with them. There's always been this competition between, Shoigu and Prigozhin. I think they were fighting for a positional dominance. They wanted more power. They wanted, they were tired of, being fed this and that, or under the control of the MOD. They wanted to be part of the MOD and as a separate entity, or I don't know if Prigozhin wanted to take the whole leadership, but I think that he's fighting for more power, and so there always has been this grind back and forth, right? And one thing that really concerns me is what happens now between Putin and Lukashenko, and does that really damage the relationship between him and Lukashenko in the long term? I mean, I know that what was it? Lukashenko just gave them a bunch of more military aid, whatever they had left. I mean, the Russians really had gutted the Belarusian military, and so I wonder what this means long term as well. I think that it really is just a political positioning thing, for the most part. What I'm thinking.
So, Katarzyna, can you answer that question? How do you believe the relationship between Lukashenko and Putin will move forward from now? Because generally, Lukashenko has become subservient to Putin for all intents and purposes and dependent on him. But after this, does it become more of an equal relationship between Putin and Lukashenko?
I wouldn't consider that Lukashenko has much autonomy, again, because he's in the position for the past couple of years as someone who is like cornered or like cut off from ties from other countries, essentially. I mean, like from the West, under sanctions pressure. Now he is sort of complicit in the war on Ukraine. And then again, like I would still acknowledge, like wow, like he still like has spectacular talent of still like finding his options, right, and like playing some role even in this conflict with Prigozhin. But even if it's talk about, like I saw this comment or question in this discussion about the nuclear weapons, like what it means that now, let's say, like Belarus has nuclear weapons Russia sent to us, like to storage, like tactical nuclear weapons. Not much, because it's not that the Belarusian leadership has the say into how to use it. It's the Kremlin that sort of sent it, and they have the control over it. The Belarusian army, so it was said, like they will be trained essentially like how to operate. Maybe they would provide some. They are now providing, adjusting some infrastructure in case of using these weapons, but still, like the command is in Moscow. And I don't see like, and I would also say that Lukashenko is sort of a useful, well, maybe puppet or a tool or intermediary in conducting certain operations or even political gestures. Again, like my take, and here I'm not a military expert, but the conclusions that I tend to consider sort of quite accurate is that even placing tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus was not so much required if Russia was actually to use them. Like it is more of a gesture of like rhetoric, because like it doesn't matter where exactly you launch them. Like it could be used from the, let's say, like the airport, the planes, from Russian territory. And I also think about like a couple of months ago, Lukashenko traveled to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping, where right after Beijing announced the peace talks or like peace plan on Ukraine. And in that way, Lukashenko is more of intermediary, someone sort of establishing contacts or delivering the messages, where for Putin it might be not very convenient to do so directly, or just to sort of reinforce the gestures, the plans that are calculated in Moscow.
Let me go to Aaron. Aaron, from a strategic perspective, what do you think is going to happen in the next few days, Aaron?
So my perspective is there's gonna be a lot of underground, like I say, in the back activity. There already is. I think Putin is really going to try to solidify himself even more. But I think that it's gonna be interesting, and I can't quite put my finger on it completely yet. But I think that Prigozhin is, in a sense, stronger now because he really has solidified himself with Lukashenko, and I think that it's going to be interesting. I'll just say that it's going to be interesting.
Do you think that
But
there's
I'm sorry, can I
well,
just give a quick update very quickly? So the Ukrainian presidential advisor, speaking on behalf of Zelensky, has said that Prigozhin almost nullified Putin today. Almost nullified Putin today. And also we're hearing now, once again, that the US Secretary of State Blinken has called Ukrainian and Turkish foreign ministers to discuss the status right now. So that was as if 2 minutes ago. Kremlin is unaware of Prigozhin's current whereabouts. However, I'm reading here that he went to some fields. His entire column has left. They've had a safe departure, and they've gone to some fields or something. So that's my update.
So
Thanks.
just on that, Vladimir, because Vladimir, you are in Ukraine right now, and I believe you're part of the army. And we've just heard Khaleesi just mentioned the statement of the Ukrainian presidential advisor, and he said that Prigozhin almost nullified Putin. I mean, is that the perspective that is that the perspective felt by everyone in Ukraine, by the leadership, and if you can give us more depth in what the thoughts are about what happened today?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. Definitely, what we understand today is that coup was real, and it was real attempt of Prigozhin to restore his credentials and power in Russia. The only thing what happened today is that people who are behind Prigozhin made a deal with Putin. And reality is that Putin loses course right now and his power in Kremlin. And most likely there will be some kind of consensus that Putin will be replaced soon. What will happen next day, we cannot predict because war is ongoing and it's pretty unstable construction. Anything could happen any next second. But looking into the reality, the beginning of the story of Prigozhin late evening yesterday was awful for Kremlin. And Putin was obviously in great stress. He was not able to handle the situation, and army was silent. Nobody stopped Prigozhin on his march towards Moscow. Until something happened behind the curtains and they made a deal. Prigozhin is sent to, actually, it's a home prison in Belarus. Lukashenko was told to be a good friend of Prigozhin for last 20 years, but it sounds very funny because Prigozhin is a cook chef of Putin and chief of his private army in Africa and in Russia. He is not Lukashenko's friend. They decided to do in this way, but actually Putin was forced to take the reality that he failed with this war in Ukraine, and there are a lot of unhappy people in Russia with this situation.
Vladimir, if I may very quickly though, would you agree that though the war is not finished, the dynamics may have greatly changed, but the situation is still not over? I mean, Russia didn't see a mass exodus of forces to bolster the lines to prevent Wagner from